This week, first up, we learn how to work with OpenVAS, the open source vulnerability scanner. Then we welcome Patrick Wardle, founder of Objective-C, to talk about trends in Mac malware and Apple security. In the security news, some describe T-Mobile security as not good. If kids steal Bitcoin, we'll just sue the parents. Newsflash, unpatched vulnerabilities are exploited. Insiders planting malware, LEDs that can spy on you, hacking infusion pumps, Prism variants, because everyone knows I love variants, 1Password vulnerabilities, and plugging a mouse in gives you admin. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly.
Every 11 seconds, there's a new ransomware attack. Oil pipelines, universities, corporations, all paying millions of dollars. Barracuda says, don't pay the ransom. Before a ransomware attack occurs, train your teams to recognize an attack and use anti-phishing technology. Protect your applications, and they can't get onto your network. Simple backup and restore solutions quickly recover your data without paying the ransom. Build your ransomware protection plan now by visiting securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
And welcome to the show. Got it this week. Hey, first, let me introduce you to a man who's ready for his close-up, Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome everyone to Paul's Security Weekly. It's episode number 708. My lunch recorded on August 26, 2021, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. The illustrious and beautiful Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left.
Hell yeah. And I didn't screw up that intro this week.
We're good.
Yeah, I did it. Hooray.
Hooray.
I remembered.
On the lines remotely, Mr. Tyler Robinson, back from some stuff. He's back though. Glad to have you back, Tyler.
Back, and I'm not dead. It's a good day to be alive.
You fought all the ninjas in one.
All the ninjas. Yes.
Do you know what kind of shoes
They
ninjas
were
wear?
wearing white.
What kind, Larry?
Sneakers.
White ones. Shit.
Mr. Jeff Mann is here with us remotely this evening. Jeff, welcome.
All I heard was sneakers. So score one for sneakers.
Sneakers, the ones you wear, not the movie.
Oh,
I'll give you half a point. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome back from a little kind of
good
vacation.
to be here. No
of work.
sneakers in this house. No sneakers here.
Sandals.
We're barefoot.
Barefoot. There you go. Well, you were just in like Hawaii or something, right? Do they wear?
Yeah, I
shoes
was in Hawaii last week, and then just for fun, we did a run up to meet with a friend up at Coeur d'Alene for a meeting last night, and about 375 miles each way. It's not a bad little trip.
Nice. Security Weekly Unlocked.
Maui was more fun.
Sorry, Lee. Security Weekly Unlocked will be held in person this December 5th through the 7th at the Hilton Lake Buena Vista. We're excited to announce our first round of speakers that includes Leslie Carhart, David Kennedy, Alyssa Miller, O'Shea Bowens, Marina Chiavata, Patrick Coble, Chris Eng, Eric Escobar, Nick Leghorn, Michael Schlatt, Kevin Johnson, and Justin Kohler. Visit securityweekly.com/unlocked, register, and check out the Rockstar lineup. And now we're going to talk about OpenVAS. Yay! Just a little bit of a background. Adrian and I are nearing completion of our product labs testing on vulnerability management. I designed into the program that when we do products labs testing, that Adrian would largely handle the commercial products and I would handle the open source products because I love Linux and open source. I mean, Adrian does too. But I was like, this is really fun. So I get to test all kinds of cool open source stuff. And one of the things I tested was OpenVAS, which is really interesting. So I guess because I worked for Tenable for so long, so I gained deep insights into the Nessus vulnerability scanner. And, well, there's a history there. I'll briefly go over the history for those that may not know or maybe remember all of the details, right? But first I want to start with what problem are you trying to solve? And so when you're looking at open source vulnerability scanner, maybe you need a vulnerability scanner, but you're short on budget, but flush with time. That is when I believe you should look at open source solutions to solve your problems.
That is an amazing way to put that.
Right? You want to build a vulnerability scanner into your environment and not pay license fees from a commercial company. Maybe you want to run regular scans. Maybe it's product specific, environment specific, and you don't want to license commercial products for that. You also may desire ultimate control and flexibility. As we'll see in this segment, compiling things from source, you also get an understanding of how it works in order to troubleshoot more easily.
And ultimate flexibility.
And ultimate, I mean, if you want to dig in and change the code, I mean, you can do that.
Flexibility may also be read as frustration, right?
Could be.
Ultimate
Could be.
frustration.
Yes. You also may need to set up a vulnerability scanner to make a point at your job that maybe the points could be you have vulnerable systems. A vulnerability scanner could help identify said vulnerable systems, and maybe your patch management program is inaccurate or teams are overconfident, and a vulnerability scanner can help you with some of those things. A little bit of the history. In 2005, Tenable decided that Nessus version 3 would be closed sourced, leaving Nessus version 2 remaining under the GPL and fully open source. I joined Tenable, just as an FYI, in March of 2009, where it was still fresh on people's minds that Nessus version 3 was closed source and Nessus version 2 was still open.
4 years later.
4 years later.
The industry was not bitter.
No. No, they were. And they told me about it, which was fine. That was part of my job at Tenable. I embraced it. Several forks appeared shortly thereafter in 2005. Obviously, most notably was the OpenVAS project, Open Vulnerability Assessment System. Greenbow Networks, which is a German-based company, spearheaded the effort to continue developing OpenVAS. So I didn't look to see like how much of the OpenVAS source code was still the code engine that was open sourced. I did see in some of the updating that some of the like nasal scripting stuff that was open source at the time in 2005 was still there. They're likely maintaining some of that. What happened is the commercial versions of Nessus and the open source versions of Nessus took two very divergent paths from an architecture.
They forked, if you will.
They forked, yes. But architecturally, they became very, very, very different.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. So the Greenbone Security Manager appeared in 2010, furthering Greenbone's efforts to turn an open source vulnerability scanner into a full-fledged vulnerability management platform. So that is their commercial play today. Now, OpenVAS, like when you use just the term OpenVAS, that it describes many different components. I was actually kind of astonished that I was like, oh, I download the scanner like I downloaded Nessus and I go run it. And no, there's a lot of different components, some of which are on this slide. And I plucked these from GitHub just to show people that there are, I think, 7 different components that you have to download and compile if you're going that route, or put together if you're doing a VM or a container.
Ultimate flexibility.
Ultimate flexibility. The GVM, so Greenbone Vulnerability Management Solution, has its own set of libraries. These libraries are used by the other components and form a standard library that they used for in their architecture process. I couldn't easily find like a really good architecture diagram. If someone at Greenbone happens to catch this, like I'd love to catch up. I'd love to kind of see more of a kind of functional design architecture diagram of how all these components fit together. I can kind of guess based on some of these descriptions and having it set up. So the second thing is OpenVAS itself. So this is the scanner. This is likely what still probably shares some of that code with Nessus version 2. Then there's the OpenVAS SMB, which is a completely separate GitHub repo that handles the SMB components, likely because there's so much going on in SMB that decided to put that in its own repo.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah. Then there is OSPD.
Oh, Christ, there's more?
Oh, there's more. This is 4 more. This is a total 7, right? So this is the Open Scanner Protocol. According to the documentation, creates a unified interface for different security scanners, making their control flow and scan results consistently available under the Greenbone Vulnerability Manager service. So there's actually 2 different kind of middleware layers, right? Because the Greenbone Security Assistant is the web front end. The Greenbone Vulnerability Manager is yet another middleware kind of system. As well as you also need the OSPD OpenVAS, which is the OSP server implementation, allowing GVM to remotely control OpenVAS. So you have like the scanner, kind of these multiple middle layers that do this queuing for the scanners and things of that nature, and also do the communication between what the user is telling it to do in the GUI. There's a Rita server involved as well, and all these components kind of fit together to make up more of a vulnerability kind of management. It also alludes to the fact that you could, the open scanner protocol, you could attach another scanner to if you so chose. So they've kind of like extrapolated out these parts of like scan, scheduling and management, communication of the control plane, like, hey, I want to run a scan against this network kind of thing, along with the actual scanning component and then the reporting of the results. So they've kind of pulled all those pieces apart, and that's why you have 7 different projects that have to fit together.
So my question to you, you called them out on, hey, we need a functional diagram of what this looks like. Yeah. I can see functional diagram needed here for because my mind is already struggling with it.
Yeah, that's what I couldn't find in their documentation, is kind of how all these pieces fit together and exactly which data they share over which protocols. I think it'd be super, super helpful.
Yeah,
and I could go like reverse engineer and try and figure it out, but
and that was exactly, they're all on GitHub, so they're open source projects, so they could conceivably accept pull requests from somebody in the community that understands how this works to create said documentation.
Right. Correct.
But I think you kind of hit it right on the head that, hey, Greenbone, please.
Yeah, and maybe I just couldn't find it, or I mean, I did poke around on their website. In any case, it would be helpful. So to get OpenVAS or the Greenbone Vulnerability Management Platform, which is what you ultimately end up running, as I did not see like a clear way to just use like the OpenVAS scanner from the command line kind of thing. So there's 3 different ways to get all of the components, right? One, you can download a pre-configured VM from Greenbone, which requires registration, which that's nice if you want to go down that route. I wanted a little more challenge and a little more control, and maybe you don't want to give them your registration information. Maybe you do, but that's out there, and they do provide that for you. There are several open source projects that have made available Docker container builds. Some are very out of date. Some are up to date. Not all of them work very well in my testing. I did find one. The link is in this slide deck, which is also linked in the show notes for this episode. So if you go to securityweekly.com/PSW 708, I believe is the page for show notes for this. There's a link. This is a PDF version that I'm giving out for free for anyone who wants to take a look at it and see the notes and all the links. So IMMAUSS, iMouse. There's a gentleman that runs this company, cybersecurity company, and has graciously provided an awesome container system for running this. So I'm going to go through all the components on how to compile it from source, but realize you can go to the iMouse GitHub page that I linked to in this, and in 2 commands. One command, you create a Docker volume. I believe I might be getting that confused with my Nmap container, but basically in a couple of commands in Docker, you can spin up OpenVAS. In fact, in production, like that's how I run it. I actually just use the container builds because I find it to be a little cleaner and neater and much easier to maintain, as this guy does the maintenance for it, right? Right. So then you can compile all of the components from source. This is tedious and time-consuming, but a great learning experience, because if you're going to run this in a VM from Greenbone or in a container system, my feeling is you should know a little bit about how it works under the covers in case something breaks. You'll have a much easier time troubleshooting it. There was another individual that I want to call out, Macyotox, MAKYOTOX. Macyotox.
I'm guessing.
Thank you, Larry. .medium.com is his blog.
I knew you were going to have a problem with that, so I practiced.
Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't even know if that's right. But
he has a guide on installing OpenVAS and Greenbone on Ubuntu 2004. And that guide saved me a whole ton of time. Because if without that guide, you'd have to go read all of the individual instructions for all of the GitHub repos and read some of the forum postings on Greenbone's site. So like he did that all for you. And I do have tweaks to his guide. So if you're listening, either people are listening, you guys are awesome. Thank you for your contributions. I've reached out to the iMouse guy on LinkedIn. I gave a shout out, I believe, to the Greenbone guide that was written by that individual on Twitter as well. So I tried to reach out and also thank them for their contributions, because this segment is based on much of their work. As I used some of the container Docker files and such to make sure I had all of the components and packages installed when I was compiling from source. So this guide that shows you how to compile and install it on Ubuntu 20.04, I also had to add some of my own tweaks to it, because since that was posted 3 months ago, the OpenVAS developers made some changes. But I'll walk you all through it. The setup. I really like VirtualBox. Larry, you and I were talking about that at a meeting this morning.
Yep.
I actually used the packages in the Ubuntu repo to install VirtualBox, which I also found works with Detection Lab. And just as an FYI, I rarely find that this works. So anytime I install Docker, Golang, Ruby, Node.js, and try and install an open source project on top of it, I find that I have to go to the official repos and or GitHub repos for those projects and install them a specific version that works with the open source project that I'm working with, because rarely what's included in Ubuntu is the right version for what you need. However, in this case, the VirtualBox that is packaged with Ubuntu 20.04 works great, which is what I'm using for the VM build as well. I used Ubuntu Server 20.04. I followed the instructions in the link in my presentation to install VirtualBox tools. I'll leave that as an exercise to the reader. I gave it 2 cores, 30 gigs of disk, and 16 gigs of RAM. Now, you could probably get away with less, but more is actually more in this case. And just as an FYI, 10 gigabytes of space is not enough, because Ubuntu Server takes up about 7 or 8 gigs in that.
Ask how you know this?
Because I did it and it failed and I had to rebuild it. That's when I went with 30 gigs just to be safe.
And also on that Windows XP VM that you just need for that one thing to do for your ham radio stuff, because of it's an old radio and it still works just great. Don't pre-allocate 60 to 80 gigs worth of disk first.
Yeah, probably not a good idea.
Yeah, no. Ask me how I know this.
So that's the setup.
I'm surprised 2 cores is enough. I would have expected not memory, but cores to be a challenge.
Yeah. And again, your mileage is going to vary. It's going to depend on how many systems you're scanning and how fast you want your scans to take, right? I mean, in my testing, the more resources you throw at it, the faster the scans run, basically, rightly. So the next step. So now we're getting into the actual compilation steps. This is a pretty long and tedious process, not going to lie. Had to do it a couple times before I got it right, and then do it again to compress it down a little bit and make it more repeatable. So the first thing you do is install prerequisites. Now, these are like all of the prerequisites. And I got it to a point where I could install all of these packages, and then throughout the rest of the process, I didn't have to apt-get install anything else. So I did it a couple of times and then went oh, I forgot this package, or I need this package. So this is the complete list that I was working with to install all of the prerequisites. First thing you need to do is, as I was saying earlier, install the official package repo for Yarn, so that when you apt-get install Yarn, it installs it from the official repos, which gives you a more recent version than what is included in Ubuntu 20.04. So that's those steps. Then you need to add a GVM user and install the database. The GVM user is what will allow you to run all these processes. It's also the same username that will be installed in the database. And the setup will basically take into account that you've created a GVM user to do all of your management of OpenVAS. Very standard, Linux commands, Unix commands to add a user. I did then set a password for this user and add them into the sudoers file, giving them full permissions. And the reason I had to do that is because changes that were made a few months ago in the OpenVAS repo, I'll explain a little later on, but essentially what they did was they said if you specify the prefix as /opt/GVM, they don't honor that for all installation locations, which means it will install stuff in places that require root access. And the OpenVAS developers have said that this is more standard, and we don't want to deviate for some of these file and directory locations, but that also changes how you build and install, because you have to do sudo make install rather than make install, and then change some permissions so your GVM user has access to those. Yeah, so that was the bit that changed recently.
On this one, I noticed it's sort of the top there with the creation of the users that the GVM and OpenVAS packages is a comment. So the line is preceded by an Octothorpe.
I missed a pound sign there. I did. It resized. Yes.
Oh, no, not so that it resized, but the other commands are also comments?
No. Good point, Larry.
Because they are prefaced by an Octothorpe.
I should have had a slide that explained my format, which is I made a mistake in my format. The comments should be in green and preceded by a pound sign. In this case, I missed one of the pound signs, but the comments are in green. The commands that you type are all in bold.
Okay.
Commands that are run as root have a pound sign in front of them, and commands that are run as a regular user have a $sign in front of them. That was my format.
Your slide needs some work.
What's that?
Your slide needs some work.
Yeah, in here I apologize. I missed a pound sign in front of one of the comments.
Yeah, I get that it wrapped, but because I was
that was a Sans thing too.
Yeah,
I think Sans first told me that like commands need to be in bold. If it's run by root, it's pound sign. Regular use is a $sign.
Yep.
And I put comments in a different color.
Yep. Because your sudo command is not being run by root. Because if you are root, you don't need sudo.
I'm using sudo
to use the Postgres user.
The Postgres user.
Got
That's
it.
Correct.
That should have been a $sign there, buddy.
No, because he was root already.
I am root, and I want to be Postgres.
Yep.
So the instructions use sudo.
See?
You could have used
Postgres.
You probably could have used su. The point is you need to become the Postgres user using either su or sudo.
Yep. See? I told you I was going to heckle.
That's good. That's good.
But we're good. Nice.
Next thing you need to do is clone the repos. So you become
comments in green.
Comments in green.
Prefaced by the Octothorpe.
Yes. Prefaced by the hashtag. It's not a hashtag in this context. In this context, it is not a hashtag. It's a pound sign. So I become the GVM user, and then I execute all these commands. I update my package config, which gives me the extra library path for when I'm compiling it. So anytime you become the GVM user, you'll notice you have to export the package config path variable to set up the path correctly for compiling and building stuff. Also of note on this one, 20.08 is the latest stable version of OpenVAS. There is a 21.08 or the next version that's still in active development, and I've tried to compile and use that version, and it is a no-go.
You just noped right the hell out of that one.
No-go. No, that is a no-go. You can try if you want. If you want even more pain and suffering in your life, you can try. But it realized it's under active development, so I stuck with 20.08.
The alpha or the development branch, as it were.
Yes, correct. Now you need to build some of that source to get you started. So you make a build directory. You run the cmake command. So like cmake makes your make files and configure scripts, right? Because so it's like a build process to build your build process. In fact, and then sudo make install, because like I said, they took it upon themselves to make changes that force you to become root when you do make install, and then also change permissions of files after the fact, which I did all that and got it working. You'll need to also go build. So you need to, in this step, you're building the GVM libs, the OpenVAS SMB, and OpenVAS, and then you do all that. And then
you do all this.
You go back to root. You do all this. ldconfig updates your library path and headers, because you installed a bunch of libraries. So when you come back in your root, you need to make sure you update that. And I even put some links to some of the things that are happening in these commands. I have some reference links in there in case I either don't cover them or didn't remember what some of the commands did. I did research all of the commands that you're running and put references there at the bottom of the slide as well. So you have to configure is it Redis or Redis? I don't know the correct pronunciation. I think I've heard it both ways.
Yeah,
Redis.
I say Redis.
Redis, okay. So you have to install Redis, do some stuff for that. You have to, the links that I provided at the bottom of this slide explain why you have to increase your core SO max connection variable setting in syscontrol.conf, as well as changing your values for overcommitment of memory as well. Yes.
Sounds complicated.
It's for Redis, and the full description of why you do that is in those links at the bottom. So you update your syscontrol config. You then disable transparent huge pages, which is also explained in my links below. That is an important step. Again, something about too many files open at once or something is the error that you get, I believe, with Redis, or one of the other components, I forget which. But something, if you don't do that step and disable transparent huge pages in the kernel, you will get errors to the effect of too many open files. And ulimit, according to these links, will not fix that problem for you.
This sounds fantastic.
Yes. So you do your system control things, reload the daemons. You give GVMs what it should have in the sudoers file. So I'll go back and I'll remove my entry from the sudoers file that gives you all access as root, and I'll go with what was presented here. So this gives the GVM user the access that it needs in the sudoers file. And so I'll remove the password and the whole thing after the fact, after I build and configure it, because that's the only reason I needed full access in sudo. Then you need to change some permissions on all that stuff we installed in the previous step. I need to make sure the GVM user owns all of those other places that the installs put them, as I explained before. Then you need to update, do the Greenbone NVT sync, which downloads all the plugins. That command takes a really long time. I thought I put a comment in there that command takes a really long time, but that command takes a really long time. Greenbone-NVT-sync. Go get some coffee.
Hey, Dad, are we there yet?
Yeah, go get some coffee. Come back and then build and install the Greenbone Vulnerability Manager and the Greenbone Security Assistant in the same manner that you installed the other packages. Then I think you have to run that chown command again, because those builds put files in other places as well, which I think I did have that in here.
Yeah.
Then you need to update the SCAP data. I think that also takes some time. That first one right there, and the other one's not so much. So there's a couple of commands in there that take a really long time.
And those two are for plugin type stuff?
Yeah. So the NVT one on the previous slide downloads all of your NASL and NVT plugins is what they call the plugins in OpenVAS.
Yep.
And then they also sync your SCAP and CERT data. I think those are the NVD database and your SCAP databases. Those are just databases of bunches of CVEs and stuff like that.
I can see why that could take some time.
Yeah. The certs updates its SSL certificates. I believe that's for getting all of your plugins and updates. It uses SSL as part of the validation to make sure that no one's putting a malicious plugin in or something like that. So it has its own SSL things, which you can see in here as well. Then you have to install OSPD and OSPD OpenVAS, which are Python packages. So there's some Python scripts that run as part of this to run some of these services. Once you install those, then you need to put things in different locations and change permissions so that it will actually run. Because what happened is when the developers made that change, it puts the certificates, for example, in varlib GVM directory structure, which by default does not have the user does not have access to that directory, so you have to move it in or copy it. I probably should move it so the key is in one place, not two, into opt GVM varlib GVM private CA, which is how this build is configured. So you do all those commands to basically fix the thing that the developers decided was a better thing to do. And then you can start the OpenVAS scanner, the GSA, and the GVM services. So these are all of the middleware vulnerability management services and thing in the web interface that needs to run in order for you to actually get up and do scans.
And now that your Gen 2 system is installed, now we can install OpenVAS.
Yes, exactly. So there's 3 commands there. First is the OpenVAS scanner. Next is the GVDM, the vulnerability management daemon, and the GSA daemon, which I believe is the web interface daemon. Then it gives you a grep command that you should run to make sure all of those services are running. If they're not, I have the log file locations of everything in the last slide as well, if you need to troubleshoot that, which I did. Need to do a lot of troubleshooting to come up with the previous set of commands on this slide that I had to make different directories and move files around.
This is my shocked face.
Yeah, to get it to run, right? Which I didn't have to do when I did this 3 months ago, but now I do. And I'm glad I tested it before this segment. All right, now it's time to create some systemd services. All of the 7 different packages, at least 3, maybe 4 of which are actually running services on the system for those running services. These are the steps to create them as systemd services and reload them, start them, and enable them. So that's the first round. Then you're going to do some more systemd services. On the next slide, you'll create 1, 2, 3, 4 more systemd services to run all of the various components. Then at part 10,
There is no and then.
and then part 10 is you create your GVM scanner. So you register a OpenVAS scanner. You then create the admin user with a command. So these are, again, the GVM users executing GVMD to create scanners, create users, and make your the feed owner of a particular UID. So this is all just to basically register your scanners and get them created and set a username and password that you'll use to log into the web interface. For troubleshooting, I list the log directories where all of the logs will be that will report the errors in case maybe by the time you get to this, something else has changed and you might need to change your build process. Excuse me. So that's where all of the log files will live. And if it works, finally, you rejoice and you can log in and then start running scans, which is actually pretty easy. And if there's demand, I can show you how to run scans. But it's pretty you go create some targets, create a policy or modify a policy, and initiate a scan. It's a lot. A lot of steps.
I think you need a cigarette.
We finally have it up and running. I can pay attention now.
Yes. Now we're up and running with OpenVAS. But again, I think it's important to understand how things work under the hood. If you're just running the scanner and it's not working and you haven't gone through all those steps, you're not going to have any idea, obviously. There's lots of different components, lots of different running services, lots of different configurations.
You were just giving me flashbacks of 30 some years ago trying to get stuff to compile on Solaris.
And again, I did this primarily to gain experience. I even learned some things about Linux commands. You're never done learning about. Unless you're Hal Pomerantz, he's still not done either, but knows a lot more about Linux and Unix than I do. So I'm always trying to learn. I'm like, well, if I go through this process, I'm probably going to learn something, which I did. And then it breaks, and then I have to fix it, and then I learn more. And now if I run it in a pre-built VM or a Docker container and something's not working right, I'll at least have some background knowledge to go start doing some troubleshooting.
Yep. Tyler, you got a comment in there?
I was just curious if this makes it worth it to actually pay for the subscription on the paid tools.
In doing these tests, Tyler, I often wonder, and I don't want to point fingers and say anyone's doing this, but I think because sometimes it's very difficult to get the stuff running, do you wonder if they've purposely made it difficult or left things out so that you struggle with it and do exactly what Tyler said and go, I'm just going to go pay for it.
Yeah. And specifically not to Tenable, but to Greenbone.
Yeah.
For their commercial.
Greenbone for their commercial version. Yeah.
And after you get all this going, don't you now have to set up some jobs to run the SCAP data and speed other thing updates whatever interval to keep them current?
That's correct. That's also why I like running it in a container, because I can just destroy the container. I leave my data volume alone, destroy the container, and rerun it. It's actually also how I run Apache Guacamole, rather than trying to figure out what Tomcat version needs to be. Like, when actually, it's interesting, OpenVAS will find the vulnerabilities in Apache Guacamole and go, hey, Paul, you need to patch those. And by patching them, I just destroy the container and build a new one. And it rereads my config, and the world's a better place.
Holy guacamole.
Holy guacamole, Batman. Yep, it's a great point, Lee. Yeah.
But Lee, he in that configuration, I did see that he had the commands for updating those databases.
Yeah, he did.
So, yeah, but Lee's got a point. You should probably run those on cron.
Yep.
Keep them up to date on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. Yep, good catch, Lee.
I mean, if I'm trying to protect my phony baloney job, I need to do this all by hand.
Well, right.
But who has
Step
time
11
anymore to do this shit by hand? Oh my God, this is cool, but boy.
It also, huge props to the maintainer and maintainers of the container system, because they're basically repeating this process, but automatically in shell scripts and Docker files to build the containers. So that's really cool. Also, I have a webcast that I have built. The slides are built. It's ready to go. We're really just looking, I'll be honest, we're looking for a sponsor to have a sponsored webcast, and I will walk you through how to work with the results, how to do Nmap with vulners, how to do OpenVAS, run some scans, validate some results, use another open source project called vols.io. Have you heard of vols.io? It uses SSH to create trust between systems and do vulnerability management on your Linux systems. So I'll show you how to, that was another adventure in open source as well. So I'll show you how to set up, configure that, and run that. Get their web interface is really interesting. There's a lot of stuff in the vols.io. They'll let you filter on vulnerabilities and sort them. Really complex web interface for that. So we've got a webcast all put together. Check the Security Weekly website and or our mailing list to learn about when that is scheduled. So I do have that, and we're looking for a sponsor for it. So cool. Next technical segment will be, I will be sharing my Nmap and Vulners configurations. So a little bit about FlanScan from Cloudflare, but also how to pin up your own Nmap container. So I did a build for an Nmap container that I'm really happy with. I'm going to share it with the audience. And interesting things about the results that you get. Not so thrilled with vulners. I'm actually pretty impressed with the results from OpenVAS versus some other things in the open source world.
I was just about to ask, do you have the results done for, like, what's the comparison of OpenVAS, say, to something like Tenable or one of the other paid subscriptions?
Yet. Adrian's working on that now, so he has all of my data from the open source stuff and access to all of my air quotes research. Right, it's really just my test runs of everything. And so right now we're actually working on running the commercial scanners and pointing out any differences. I do have to say, having run the commercial scanners before and all the open source scanners, I'm pretty impressed with some of the stuff in OpenVAS. In the webcast, I'll show you how to recast vulnerability severity in OpenVAS, which I was like, this is a free and open source project, and it has them. Like, that's actually really cool. And also some of the, like, it'll find OpenVAS. What I liked was it'll find default credentials. If you're like me and you forgot to remove the Pi user and reset the default Pi password, and you've enabled SSH, OpenVAS actually finds that and says, hey, dummy, you forgot to change the default password on your Raspberry Pi. I'm like, oh, duly noted. That was good. I like that finding.
Hey, Paul, here's your PCI pop quiz for the week.
Yes.
When did PCI first introduce the concept of what today we would call vulnerability prioritization, but the ability to recast the severity of vulnerabilities?
Oh.
Take a guess.
2009.
Are you
very close.
Looking for a year or looking for a PCI version?
Either one.
Okay.
And Paul's definitely in the ballpark. There was no release in 2009, but version 2 of PCI Data Security Standard, which was released in October 2010.
There you go. Because the reason I was able to guess that was because it was around the time I started at Tenable.
Gotcha. Very good. you pass.
Without getting into how your bake-off between them went, how's the maturity of the UI once you've got it up and running versus some of the other ones you've played with?
Yeah, the UI, and nothing against Greenbone, right? But the UI is a little rough. But I mean, it's free and open source, so,
So
I'm
it
not
matches the
complaining.
install process.
Yeah, it's a little, it's a little rough. A little time with it, and you get by. Compared to some of the, I think a lot of this is just funding and maturity. The other people have the nice React interface with all the fancy bells and whistles. I don't know effectiveness wise if that really makes a bit of difference. I mean, I'm able to run scans with OpenVAS, take advantage of the results. It finds stuff that I was like, oh, I need to go fix that. So it's good enough, Lee. And I think there are certainly more advanced features in, like I've got consoles on Rapid 7, SecureWorks, and Digital Defense, and all their interfaces look fairly similar. Like you can tell they're on some modern JavaScript framework and have done a nice job with the UI. They all don't look that all that dissimilar from each other. So yeah, OpenVAS gets the job done.
Cool.
Sweet. That concludes this technical segment. Stay tuned in the next few weeks or so. We'll be doing Nmap and coming up soon a webcast. So stay tuned. Coming up next, Patrick Wardle from Objective-C. Stick around.
Qualys has brought together vulnerability management and patch management, letting security teams discover vulnerabilities and apply patches immediately, all within a single, unified app. Sign up for a free trial of Qualys VMDR, vulnerability management, detection, and response today at securityweekly.com/Qualys. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. The Cyber Risk Alliance, in partnership with InfraGard, has launched the Critical Infrastructure Resilience Benchmark Study. Measure your readiness for ransomware by completing the survey and getting your score by visiting securityweekly.com/CIRB. Joining us tonight is Patrick Wardle. Patrick has worked for NASA, the NSA, and has presented at countless security conferences. He's intimately familiar with alien spies and talking nerdy. Joining us tonight to talk about trends in Mac malware and Apple security. Patrick, welcome.
Thank you. I am stoked to be back on the show. And yes, to talk nerdy.
Yes.
My favorite.
Outstanding.
Talk nerdy to me.
Patrick, I wanted to ask you, how did you get to focus on specifically Apple-based vulnerabilities? Was that just like your comfort zone, or is it in an area that you feel like needs more attention or combination?
It was almost happen chance, and in retrospect, it was a very auspicious decision. But what happened was working at the NSA. I was at TAO, essentially developing offensive cyber capabilities, predominantly for Windows-based targets. And then when I left, I wanted to still be able to leverage my foundational skills of reverse engineering, vulnerability discovery, exploit development. But I didn't really want to step on anyone's toes, especially the NSA's toes, and said, hey, let me just take this to a different platform. And at the time, Mac OS was definitely this second-class citizen, the stepchild that was kind of far away, but it was kind of coming up in popularity. Again, this was around 2008, 9, 10. And said, I'll take a chance and kind of dive in. And so that was really just kind of the reasoning why I really began focusing on that platform. And then as I dug into that more, I realized there was a lot of interesting vulnerabilities here, a lot of interesting research to be done. And, it was something that many other security researchers weren't really digging into. So I was like, cool, I'll hang out. And then also, in terms of developing the Mac security tools and the anti-malware stuff I work on, I had a similar story where I had a friend who was actually a surfboard shaper, and he said, "Hey, Patrick, my system is hacked. You do computer stuff. You can help me. As we all know, right? Anytime you do computer stuff, you become the IT fix-it person for friends and family. Apparently,
friends and family help desk."
Exactly. It's a cross we must all bear. Mm-hmm. And I said, sure, yeah. So I came over to his house and he had a Mac. And I was like, man, this was Windows. I would download and run, sysinternals auto runs to see what's been installed, perhaps maliciously or surreptitiously. And, it looked like it was adware on his system. But I honestly didn't even really know where to begin to start looking. And so I said, you know what? I'll be back. Ran home, did some research, and wrote this little script that would enumerate persistence locations for macOS, because there really was no auto-runs utility at the time for macOS, which again was really surprising to me. So I took that back to his house, ran it, uncovered a bunch of adware, was able to clean his system and score a really sweet deal on a custom surfboard. So sometimes being a nerd does pay off.
There you go. That's awesome.
That also
reminds me of Josh Wright.
Eyes.
We'll hack for surfboards.
Sushi I like that. I should put that on a t-shirt.
Yeah.
But again, that was just kind of an interesting eye-opening experience where I was like, wow, there's definitely a need here. And I have some skills that I think I can apply here. And so those two experiences really what kind of got me stoked on Mac OS. And in some ways, the rest is history.
Nice. I want to ask you about TAO, but I don't want to ask you about TAO because I don't want I don't want you to get in trouble for anything. And as I know, interviewing folks from the no such agency, you talk about what you feel. Don't let me push you in a direction you're uncomfortable. Obviously.
No, that's funny. But the line that I was always told that now I sometimes know is it's on a need to know basis and you don't need to know, which is a little harsh. But
I get it. But was there a time where you couldn't say that you worked for NSA and specifically the group TAO?
I don't think so. I think it's a personal choice for a lot of people. It's really more the rules and regulations are you can't really disclose your sources and methods. But I think, and especially recently, saying you were gainfully employed there is acceptable and understandable. And I think actually something that people who do work there, again, if they're comfortable with this, should proudly wear as kind of a badge of honor. And honestly, in terms of recruiting, right? If you have done a stint at the NSA, I think you're immediately incredibly employable because you really get this unique insight into understanding how a sophisticated adversary performs offensive cyber espionage operations, which is really helpful then for defending defense capabilities, for example, to protect American interests. And also, before I was in TAO, I did some work on kind of the NTOC side of NSA. I'm not sure if it's still called that, but the defensive mission, analyzing malicious code and exploits used against DoD systems. And that was really eye-opening and, again, just invaluable for career building and knowledge. So again, I think people who work at the agency and leave have a really unique skill set. And I think, they can leverage that, in beneficial ways, for example, to find new jobs and ensure they're pretty much always going to be in demand.
Yeah, I feel like the vibe that I get is that a lot of people do a stint, and I think the reason that they leave is due to bureaucracy. But I don't want to discourage people from working for the government because we need people in the U.S., doing that mission, essentially. Was that some of your reasons for leaving, basically bureaucracy?
Yeah, I mean, I hit the nail on the head. It's, we had this kind of this small team we developed to go after, let's say, some of the NSA's more difficult targets. It was called the Priority Access Team, or the PAT. I don't know why, but that just happened to be the name. And, we were given a lot of kind of, I don't want to say free range, but a lot of flexibility to kind of come up with creative solutions to, crack some of these targets that previously had proven very, very difficult. And we had a lot of success, but at the same time, a lot of times we were hampered by bureaucracy. And I remember this one example. We were working directly with the director of the NSA, who was like, this is what we need to accomplish, and you have my full approval. And so we designed an operation essentially, and middle management was like, no, this is too risky, you can't do this. And we were just like, but we have approval from the director. And they're like, yeah, no. And so the next week the director called and he was like, how's it going? And we were like, well, we weren't allowed to do this. And he was frustrated, and eventually it all got sorted out, and we were able to pull it off. And that award on the back, I don't know if you can see, is the result of that. So there was definitely a lot of success. But I just remember thinking like, wow, this bureaucracy is just stifling. But I really like what you said in terms of not wanting to discourage people. So I think especially for those breaking into the cybersecurity industry, it's really invaluable. So I started as a kind of college intern, and then right after college, and they have a ton of courses they'll train. They have opportunities to pay for your grad school. The experience you get is just invaluable. If I really have to pick one thing in my cybersecurity career, one thing I can point to that really has given me a ton of success, it would be that time at the NSA. So yeah, it doesn't have to be for your entire life, but in terms of the experience you get, I think it's A, invaluable, and B, not sure you can get that anywhere else.
Yeah, and I feel like too, Patrick, you might have been somewhat unique in being able to design the operation and some of the technical components, whereas what I've gleaned and hearing people that have left the agency and can share whatever details they can is that it tends to be very compartmentalized. Like you might be the person designing the operation, and you might be the person designing this tiny little piece, and you don't get to see the bigger picture. And there's reasons for that as well.
Yeah, compartmentalization is good from a security point of view. But yeah, at some point, you can also feel that you're just this little gear in a larger system, and sometimes you don't kind of get to see the fuller picture. And so, we had a lot of fun, a lot of success in this smaller team because, we had kind of this autonomy, let's say, and that ability to really kind of act more flexible, but also kind of see things end to end, which was very fulfilling and interesting. So,
right. And a different, when you think about warfare and secrets, a very different aspect in that obviously with if you leak your tools, that's one thing, right? Leak maybe how you create those tools might be a different thing. And it's different today when we talk about cyber in terms of how you keep things secret, right?
Yeah, definitely a challenge. And now you see nation states repurposing other nation states' exploits and capabilities they've uncovered. And so it's this really just battlefield almost with all these nuances and complexities and ever evolving threats. And the other thing too is the barrier of entry is really not that hard to get into. If we think about more traditional warfare, right? If you want to attack another country, you need like tanks and fighter planes, which are very expensive, but also like difficult to procure. Cyber, like if you have $1 million, you could like start going, buying iOS exploits, and you can send out phishing emails. Like very small barrier to entry. And yeah, you're not going to be a top tier adversary, but you will be playing in the same arena.
Right.
And so that's also something that I think is very interesting and unique. Since
you brought it up, Patrick, we can talk about the selling of exploits and what the press will call cyber weapons, right? To us, they're exploits. I've always kind of had this moral dilemma, and because I think many of us, they're like, wait, I could probably develop an exploit and I could sell it. The price tag of $1 million is probably could be pretty spot on, right? But then I'm like, what are people going to use it for? And morally, I'm not sure how I feel about that. How do you feel about the moral kind of conundrum with selling exploits? And
that's
I'm
a great
not
question.
saying something you do, right? I'm not implying.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think it's something that each individual has to answer, and I think it's a spectrum, and there's varying degrees of grayness on that spectrum. Personally, I've never sold an exploit. For me, it's just the moral quandary is difficult. That having been said, I used to work for U.S. government intelligence agency, and I have a lot of friends that develop capabilities and sell specifically to, let's say, U.S. government customers. And so that's something to me that's a little more understandable. The other end of the spectrum, though, you have researchers or hackers selling to whomever,
highest bidder.
A lot of times they end up being used in, I would say, inexcusable scenarios where you have certain Middle Eastern governments or even oppressive dictatorships using these offensive cyber capabilities to hack in and spy on human rights activists, women's rights activists, or even their political adversaries. And you have to think that yes, when you sell an exploit, where it's going to end up. And I think you can kind of have a good idea. I mean, I think there are companies or exploit brokers who, are very honest, and I say that kind of in quotes, but who do have strict policies because their customers also demand that, right? If you're the US government buying exploits from an exploit broker, if they're also selling them to the Chinese government, you're probably not going to do business with them.
Right.
So I think there are opportunities where, you could sell an exploit and rest assured it would be used perhaps only by your government. But again, there's still some ambiguity there. You might agree with 80% of what the government does, but that extra 20%, do you want your exploit involved in that?
Right.
So I think it's a really personal decision. For me though, it bugs me when people don't even ask that question or, sell it knowing that it's probably going to fall into the wrong hands. Again, that's a personal thing, but
do you think bug bounties have helped kind of reset some of the moral compass, or do you think that the amount that you get for a bug bounty is so disparate from what you could sell it to, for an exploit broker for?
Yeah, another great question. I think it's somewhere in the middle. I think there was a group of cybersecurity researchers, hackers, however you want to term them, who put a lot of time and effort into finding bugs and should and wanted to be financially compensated. They weren't rushing to sell those, or if they were, they felt uneasy. So yes, bug bounties now do provide a mechanism to be financially compensated for the time and effort, which I think is good. That having been said, though, I think, you also have the situation, as you mentioned, where the bug bounty programs pay essentially pennies on the dollar, or just very difficult to work with.
Yeah.
If you have a nice iOS exploit, exploit brokers will be lining up essentially.
Right.
Whereas you report that to Apple, like you're going to have to be twisting their arms to get a bug bounty payout. And, if you hop on Twitter, it's like every day, and this morning there was another discussion, you see a lot of researchers complaining about just the difficulties of the bug bounty program. And, bug bounty programs are tough, right? You want to have rules to make sure you don't just get spammed with crap and you're paying out for, not real vulnerabilities. But at the same time, and I'm talking kind of maybe about Apple specifically, like there's no security researcher that is stoked about the program, or at least no vocal ones. You just hear people complaining. So I think that could be improved a lot. And then, yes, it would give researchers another avenue to maybe sell their bugs and be fairly compensated while knowing ultimately it's going to protect the users. That having been said, there's still going to be those who, are going to be working with the exploit brokers who are always going to pay more. And maybe some researchers also like thinking that they're supporting perhaps, national security interests. So I think it's somewhere in the middle. Bug bounties help, but, it's never going to be the panacea that maybe the vendors hope for.
Patrick, you've already established that Apple, sorry, Tyler, that Apple's difficult to work with. And we've certainly seen that in the years covering the show. Right? You go back to, David Maynard and Johnny Cash. And being close to that situation at the time, like that set the stage for me. I think that what really kind of seeded the bad taste in my mouth I had with Apple in the way it treated security vulnerabilities. Has it gotten better? And more important, why do you think that's the case with Apple?
Interesting. And this is something we could talk about a lot. So I'll try not to go on too much of a rant here. Yeah. But I think it comes down to Apple's hubris. They believe that, once they make a decision, that it is the best way. Like, why wouldn't you just freely give your bugs to Apple? It's like, you could see this with some of the technology they just introduced to, scan people's phones and images for illegal content.
Yep.
They pretty much came out and said, wow, we didn't expect this community feedback. And it's like, if you were kind of in touch with the community, this would not have come as a surprise. But Apple is not. That having been said, the security team is great. I think they're constantly trying to improve their bug bounty program, but I think they just keep running into these cultural issues. And unless there is this fundamental shift where they see researchers as being on the same side, or at least being close allies, you're going to just run into these problems, because this is not something that is a financial problem, right? Apple has more money than God. They could come out and make their bug bounty program like a no-brainer, where as soon as you find a bug, you're like, wow, I'm going to Apple. But it's not the case.
They pay less than
Whereas
Microsoft.
If you look at Microsoft, I feel like Microsoft is a lot more, let's say, emotionally mature about this. And they realized, I think, early 2000s that, they were getting hammered by hackers, right? You had all these worms, Microsoft was losing a lot of money. Everyone was like, wow, Microsoft products are crap when it comes to security.
Yep.
And so Microsoft pretty much sat down and say, okay, well, as much as this hurts, we're going to have to put our ego aside. We're going to have to reach out to these researchers, these hackers, hire some of them, start a bug bounty program, and really say, it stings when you get on Twitter talking crap about our products, but if you're also reporting these bugs to us, overall, this will make our products far more secure. And at the end of the day, our users will be more secure. And so that was really the approach that Microsoft has taken. And yes, they're not perfect, but they seem to understand that security researchers and, white hat hackers are allies and, essentially are on the same side. Whereas Apple, I don't think, has bought into that yet. It's almost like this begrudging relationship where they're like, okay, yeah, we have to pay you for bugs because we have to. But it's not like their heart isn't in this. And again, this is why I think there is this bad taste. You essentially talk to any security researcher that has dealt with them and the bug bounty program, and they don't have good things to say. And if Apple wants to do something good, they nail it. So it's a little disheartening and disconcerting. And I think it goes back to the fact that, just their hubris and their ego continually gets in the way.
Right. Yeah. They feel like you're calling their baby ugly. It's kind of the sense
and we are, but
Microsoft
it can grow up to be a beautiful swan.
Tyler, sorry, you had a question.
No, I was just curious, kind of playing into that from your standpoint. Do you see some of the research starting to shift to, say, Mac and even the attack and threat landscape? Do you see a lot of the it's still not a large market share by any means, but the attack surface is obviously looking at some of these assets as valuable assets when executives use MacBooks, when we start to see them in a lot of the development dev bro shops. So do you see that shift in that landscape and that research starting to make a pivotal point, or is it still pretty one-sided towards the Microsoft?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. I'll caveat that, as I work in this space, I maybe am missing some of the larger picture. But, I think there's a lot of objective evidence that would point to this exactly happening. And that is, more tax, more focus on Mac OS. I think one great example is just the increased prevalence of Mac OS in the enterprise. And you also mentioned the type of targets that are running it, right? It's going to be enterprise, the R&D team, the dev shops. And when you're targeting a network, unless it's like some adware-based campaign, which is kind of lame, you're going to be wanting to target those individuals in the network anyways. So it makes a lot of sense. Last year I kind of did, or each year I do a report kind of on all the new malware for macOS that year. And last year there was a very interesting trend, and that was almost 50% of the new malware targeting the platform was actually ported from a different operating system, both Linux, but predominantly Windows. That to me was a very, very clear sign that hackers are waking up to the fact, or already were aware of this new target space, this new frontier, these juicy targets that can be, hacked. And so they're taking their Windows capabilities, their Windows implants, and porting them so they run natively on Mac OS. So I think that's a really good data point that goes to the fact that, Macs are becoming more prevalent, and hackers and adversaries are taking note. The other thing is, a lot of users still believe Macs are inherently secure out of the box. And, this is something that Apple spent a lot of money on, their marketing to get this message across. So it's really no surprise that users buy into that. Hackers can actually leverage that to their advantage in the fact that, Mac users are often overconfident. They perhaps might not, be as careful when they're browsing the internet, opening random emails, clicking random links, et cetera, et cetera. So again, if I'm a black hat hacker, I'm going after the Mac users in the enterprise because they're probably going to be not as cautious as they should be, overconfident because of Apple's messaging. And so they make amazing targets.
Wait,
so you're telling
tools. So you're telling me a Mac is not secure out of the box?
Don't open anything for me.
I've got to rethink my life. Hey, I gotta go.
I think what Apple does right is, there's not a lot of extra services that are running. I think Windows back in the day suffered from this problem. You plug in your XP, Service Pack 2 box, and within 20 minutes, it's infected with, Configure, Blaster, whatever, because there was just a myriad of listening services like SMB is open to the internet kind of thing. And like Apple luckily kind of never fell into that. But, I find a lot of vulnerabilities, and a lot of them are like laughingly shallow. And, I will caveat that I have a propensity for finding these things. But a lot of times I'm like, wow, if this code was audited by a security professional, or if someone ran a fuzzer against this, it would just like trivially fall over. And so, again, is Mac secure out of the box? I think there are some defaults that minimize the attack surface, but really once you start poking around it, it falls over pretty quick. And so take that coupled with the fact that Mac users, the average Mac user doesn't think that, you have a very juicy target and a high likelihood of success.
Is that why Bill Gates sent his memo to Microsoft employees and not Apple employees? Culturally, I feel like they're suffering from that, right? The Gates made it a priority. That in that one email changed the culture, right? But that email never happened to Apple.
Exactly. And if you talk to the security team at Apple, it's filled with brilliant people I really respect, but they talk about some of the battles they fight. It's essentially like going to another team and like begging them to be like, hey, you don't need all these entitlements, or hey, please let us audit your code before you ship it. And so there's this like cultural battle that the security team is fighting. Whereas at Microsoft, I feel like from the top down, it was like, no, this is the way it's going to be for everybody. And I think Microsoft is reaping the dividends for that. I think recent versions of, take Windows 10, 11, like they're really difficult targets to crack. There's still going to be ways in, but a lot of the low hanging fruit is gone. Whereas on Mac OS, like we just keep stumbling on stuff. You're just like, obviously this code was never audited or tested from like a security point of view, which, for me, it's great job security. So I can't get too upset.
Well, because I also think Apple, they like things to look really pretty. They like things to be usable. And then after that, maybe some security is kind of an afterthought.
That also
to be fair too, Apple is incredibly profitable. So,
true.
It's not really hurting their bottom line, the fact that they're focusing on aesthetic beauty and usability. I mean, that sells. So at the end of the day, we can't knock them too much because they're laughing all the way to the bank.
Tyler,
Tyler.
Yeah, the other side of the problem too is the diversity of tools, and obviously you've created an entire tool set around this gap, right? Objective-C.
Yep.
Some fantastic tools, by the way. Definitely appreciate some of those. But the fact that we don't have the visibility, we don't have some of the open source tools, we don't have some of the antivirus, the EDR, a lot of security-focused products, we don't have a lot of the centrally managed or visibility even built into the operating system with things like Sysmon or event monitoring. All of those visibility pieces really makes Mac a difficult enterprise target to kind of get up to speed from a security standpoint, no?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And to just add something else to the example, let's talk about memory scanning, memory imaging, memory forensics. On Mac OS, if you're an antivirus product, an EDR product, a security product, there's no way for you to scan the memory of another process. And that's kind of insane. Obviously, that's not something that any process should be granted, but via entitlements and other permissions, I think Apple could provide a secure API to provide that functionality to specific products. This is problematic because hackers and adversaries know that. We're seeing them switch to in-memory payloads. They'll install some lightweight implant loader that basically just beacons out to a server, downloads a payload, decrypts and executes it in memory. And if you're security software on that box, there's no way for you to grab that payload to write a signature, to understand the capabilities of the malware. And so I think that's just another example, Tyler, to add to your excellent point that there's limited visibility, and which makes that difficult, especially when you're trying to secure it in the context of the enterprise. I will caveat Apple is taking some steps to address this. They recently shipped the endpoint security framework, which I believe it's in 10.15. And that is designed specifically for third-party security tools to tap in. And so that is nice. And it does show that Apple is maybe starting to listen and realizing that as Mac becomes more prevalent in the enterprise, I think that was a lot of pushback where enterprise customers would go to Cupertino and say, hey, we love Macs, our employees love Macs, but we need some more insight. We need security tools that can provide auditing for compliance and security. And currently there's no mechanism. So Apple started to ship some frameworks for that. So trending in the right direction, but I still think your point is totally, hits the nail on the head. There's just less insight to what's going on. And there's still some gaps. We talked about the memory scanning. And it makes it very difficult for security tools to really provide comprehensive coverage.
Apple's move to M1, Patrick, was interesting for a lot of reasons. I think the tech journalists and pundits, that was a gift from God for us to talk about in terms of just the technology standpoint.
Amazing.
And also the security standpoint. Amazing is right. Their architecture, I was like, wow, that's really, the speed improvements and all that stuff was amazing. Was there security improvements, or does it kind of all come out in the wash? From your perspective, you had to kind of summarize from a security perspective what M1 meant for Apple products.
There are some really valuable security benefits of the M1 chip, but they are only for certain scenarios. So I think it's important to articulate what those are and have an understanding of that. So the two main areas are kind of physical security and data storage. The M1 chip provides some secure boot options and provides different mechanisms for securing data at rest, even for third-party applications. So that's great, right?
Is that like the enclave they have on iOS? Do they model that? Or
I think it's similar to that. The Intel-based Macs were vulnerable to the T2 checkmate vulnerability. That was a hardware bug. Apple was never going to fix that because it was new hardware, and they were about to ship these ARM-based platform M1 chips. So, kind of that right there and is a good example. So, that's good. That's for physical access. So you can feel a little safer about, leaving your laptop in the hotel room, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is the M1 does have some, it's an ARM-based chip or runs an ARM-based instruction set, ARM64, ARM64E. And so it does afford various hardware level security mechanisms that can complicate exploitation, specifically remote exploitation. So normally when a remote exploit is thrown, it's going to corrupt some memory in the target vulnerable process space, and usually tries to overwrite some pointer and then corrupt that to point to attacker supplied code so that ultimately, the attacker can take over the box.
Very well said.
With the M1 chip, they can use pointer authentication or PAC. This is something that the iOS chips have had for a while. And so they can verify these pointers. This is great because, basically you get this hardware level security built into your system at the chip level that can complicate a whole basically bug class, these remote exploits.
So Patrick, I have a question on that. So as a software developer, do I have to build something at compile time to support that, or is that just inherent in the hardware?
It's both. So my understanding is that the chip has to provide the instructions to quickly and efficiently do these pointer validations, but software also has to leverage them as well.
Gotcha.
I think though that they're mostly implemented in the frameworks and the runtimes that Apple ships. But if you're running Intel code on an M1 system, it's going to go through this Rosetta translation process, and I'm not sure if you get that pointer protection.
I was always questioning that process from security perspective because
definitely. The good news is that we do see it's very easy to recompile your code to run natively on M1. You basically hit recompile in Xcode. Sometimes there's some corner cases and complexities, but Apple has done a really nice job making it essentially transparent for the developer.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Recompile is needed, but you're going to gain a significant speed boost. And you're also not going to have to worry about any Rosetta issues. There were some cases where it would crash trying to translate certain programs. So luckily, we're seeing developers very quickly embrace that technology. To get back to the security of the M1 chip, so it does provide significant security in certain mechanisms. But for the malware, the average malware author, it's no additional challenges because they're still tricking users into running malicious code. And the CPU can't and shouldn't be, kind of involved in that effort. It's just, malware at the end of the day is just software, albeit malicious software. But Apple is trying to introduce other things like notarization checks to thwart that. But, the M1 chip for the average malware author isn't really too much of a worry yet. It's not, keeping them up at night.
So as easy it is for an application developer to recompile their legitimate software to run, is it equally as easy for me to recompile my payloads or reconstruct my payloads to run on an ARM platform, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly the thing. So, building malware is essentially an exercise in engineering. The initial exploit vector is definitely complicated by M1. Again, depending though on your infection mechanism. You're sending word macros and users are clicking on those, or emails with malicious attachments that users are tricked into running those. M1 really doesn't come into play there. What does come into play is Apple's notarization, which in a nutshell is Apple now has to scan and approve every binary before it's run. Before you just had to sign it with a developer ID, and it was very easy to fraudulently obtain those. Unfortunately, we have seen cases where Apple notarizes malware. Seems like their scanning system is not as robust as it should be. There's also been a lot of issues and vulnerabilities in the notarization process where you can step around those. And
to be fair, though,
because there's more on that shortly.
Yeah, but Microsoft had similar issues over in the past.
Any operating system vendor is going to fall into that. And the notarization process is actually really good because even if Apple is inadvertently notarizing adware and malware, they are also building this incredible corpus of files, right? Developers have to submit compiled binaries for them to sign, including malware authors. So even if something turns out to be malicious, Apple already has a copy of that binary and then can also look into ways to improve the notarization scanning process. So I think it's this feedback loop. There's understandably some issues up front as they kind of find their way. But I think Apple will just continue to improve that. And as a security researcher, that's a really good thing to do, because the average way the average Mac user is being infected is through some user assisted infection vector. They're essentially infecting themselves. So with notarization, even if the user double clicks on something, the operating system can say, hey, you might think that's a flash updater, but it's really not, and it's not notarized. So I'm actually not going to run it at all.
Do you see Apple moving to iOS for their desktop-based computing platform? Or with the announcement of M1 and ARM, they've made a commitment to that? Or is that just going to become for like your Apple Pro users, for people doing like heavy audio, video kind of creative stuff?
Yeah, what I think Apple will do, and they've talked to this in the past, is really keep these two separate products, essentially, kind of the Mac and iOS. But, definitely bring them closer together without fully merging them. And I think this is really smart. And we see them doing this, bringing security technologies from iOS to macOS, which is great. And that will be even easier now with, they have parity at the chip level. But, I think they understand, like, it makes sense to still have laptops where people can do debugging, poke around the system some more. Not everything runs in a sandbox. Whereas on an iPhone, their model makes a lot of sense there. So, I guess never say never, but they do seem to understand well the value of kind of keeping those separate. And especially, like I said, now since they're so close, they can use this common code base. So there's a lot of overlap, which is good. But they can still keep certain pieces divergent, which, I think for this foreseeable future, that will be maintained.
Seems to me a lot of the issues, Patrick, you're talking about in terms of like getting user with malware are largely in user land. What are your thoughts kind of going the other way with firmware? And I know we talked to some, Eclipsium is a great firm that does firmware security. And I remember reading an article that was like, no one really applies Apple firmware updates because of the operational risk, essentially, of doing that. Do you think that there's a really big inherent security risk that we need to start looking at that for our Apple devices, or like is userland probably still the greatest attack vector?
I'll caveat, I'm definitely not an expert in that space, but my understanding is, especially with the M1, they've done a really good job really securing that low-level code and interfaces outside of that. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be issues, but they hired Zeno, who was the guy that did a lot of the, it was like the Thunderbolt exploits. He'd talk a Black Hat every year about some new one, just like mind-blowingly beautiful, elegant exploits. And, to Apple's credit, they were like, wow, you're crushing us. Let's hire you. Let's get you in. Help us build the next generation system to thwart these attacks. So I really think at the lower level, especially on the new MacBooks, Apple, largely thanks to Zeno, has done a really good job securing the firmware and making that difficult. That having been said, it's always a juicy target, because if you can somehow compromise the firmware, you can survive operating system reinstalls. You're probably not going to be detected because, there's not like a trivial way to dump the firmware and see that it hashes correctly or hasn't been modified. But I do think Apple has done a good job, again, on the newer M1-based systems.
Mm-hmm. Should we be running in the enterprise an EDR or anti-malware kind of solution on our Mac OS-based systems?
Yes, 100%. And for me, there's a few reasons. One is just visibility. You want to kind of see what's going on. Two, Apple continually kind of falls short in terms of the built-in security of Mac OS. So we can briefly talk about some of those built-in security mechanisms. You have XProtect, which is basically a signature-based AV system. You have MRT, the malware removal tool, which is how Apple can delete or remove samples that it flags. And then you have things like Gatekeeper, file quarantine, and notarization. So there's definitely some security mechanisms built into macOS. The problem is these are all buggy and time again, like trivial to bypass. So you really can't lean on them or really, assume they're going to protect your systems and the enterprise. There's also no insight into them. So a new malware specimen comes out, like, how do you know if Xprotect has been updated or MRT has been updated to protect against that? You don't. Apple really is silent about this. The only way we figure this out is security researchers reverse engineer the update, take out the signatures, run it against some of the samples and say, oh yeah, Apple pushed out an update. But the updates are silent. There's no communications from Apple. So that's a little problematic. That's a little troublesome. We also see cases where they push out a signature that doesn't match anything we know. And then 2 or 3 later in a different attack, we see that malware being used. And then finally, we as AV and security researchers have a copy so we can develop signatures for our own security products. Again, you're like, Apple, come on, if you really cared about the security of your users and the community, like, you would share these malware samples, at least with the AV companies, so that they can build robust signatures. And a lot of times the AV company signatures are, let's say, more robust than Apple's, who are sometimes based on just a hash or something trivial for the adversaries to change. But I think we're seeing a big uptick of hackers target Macs, especially in the enterprise. And although the baseline security of macOS is decent and improving, adding a security product on top is, to me, really a no-brainer. We'll caveat, though, it's important to not just slap on any ADR or AV product, because what we see a lot of times is companies who have really mature, competent Windows products, security products, want parity on Mac OS because, their customers are saying, hey, we're running 20, 30% Macs now. Like, we want, an EDR product. And they just kind of port it over and say, yeah, you're good. You're like, wait, no. Like, it's way more nuanced than that. Threats targeting Mac OS operate totally differently. Sure, there's foundational concepts like persistence that malware on either platform is going to try to achieve. But you really want something where the company either focuses exclusively or has a long track record of doing Mac-specific security tools and research, because it's totally a different beast, and the attackers know that. And so it's really important that the security tools are, equally built with Mac OS in mind.
Jeff's got a question.
Yeah, Jeff.
Yeah, so for a significant portion of the commercial world out there that I run in, which is the PCI community, they are driven in terms of endpoint protection by a pesky little statement that says all operating system types commonly affected by malicious software. In your professional opinion, in 2021, does macOS fall into that category? Yeah,
I would say 100%. Malwarebytes recently published a report showing that on their endpoints, so Windows and Mac, the Mac endpoints actually reported more events, including adware, malware, exploitation attempts, and potentially unwanted software. Now, there's some way, to read into that, and is that really the case? Well, I think the details are almost irrelevant. It's the takeaway is, you have Mac OS being attacked successfully, at least in the same ballpark as Windows. And I think there's other data and other reports from other industries and companies showing that, this is accurate. It might not be one-on-one, but it's within the same ballpark. So I really think that we have to, when we're talking about Macs and the security of Macs, we have to think about it in the context or in similar mindset as we do with other operating systems. We shouldn't assume that it's better or worse per se. I mean, because that's somewhat open to debate. We should just say, this is, similar to a Windows machine. There's going to be attacks against it. We need to treat it as such. Because I think, especially now in 2021, we're seeing hackers port their malware to target Macs. We're seeing, vulnerabilities being patched by Apple, reported by security vendors, being used by malware. So to me, the takeaway is like Mac OS is, more so if not similar to Windows in terms of its security.
So I guess I'm sorry, real quick,
Yeah.
follow-up question, and then I will concede the floor. What would you consider to be an authoritative source to point to say, yes, everything that you just said? Maybe that's you. Apple coming out and acknowledging it. Anything beyond the vendors that happen to be selling a solution.
I see where you're going, Jeff. You have PCI customers that have Macs that don't want to do this type of stuff because they're not commonly vulnerable.
The argument is it's not commonly affected, and you can't.
You're right, and Jeff wants to go. You're wrong. Go read this.
Yes.
Yep.
Well, that's a really great point because, in the past working at Jamf, we ran into customers that were like, oh, we don't need to do anything additional. Apple says it's good. And I would point to a few things. One, the fact that now Apple has anti-malware technology built into the operating system that they don't really like to talk about is an admission from the authoritative source that Macs are super susceptible to malware. So the fact that every version of macOS now has a signature-based AV product built in. It's a sucky one, but it does reveal that Apple was like, wow, we're getting targeted by malware. Also, the fact that they added MRT, the malware removal tool. Again, I would think that it would be hard to justify saying Macs don't get malware if Apple didn't ship that. So I think that's one good example. You can see what Apple is doing. And then I think the AV companies, even though they have financial stake in the game, they're still publishing a lot of really good research that I think can be pointed to. The Malwarebytes example where they're like, hey, these are the events we're seeing on our Windows and Mac endpoints, and the Mac ones have more. Like, interpret that how you want, but that's an interesting data point that they're kind of transparently making available for people to draw conclusions from.
Lee, I've got one, but I will use the. Oh, never mind.
I was going to say, I would also add to that the fact that almost every offensive toolkit, paid and or free, and or shady or open source, now supports OS X as a primary target implant.
Great point.
Has a full capability with inside of them.
Man, you can tell Tyler's age. It's no longer called Mac OS X. It's called Mac OS.
Oh boy!
But I think
run
the
into
other
a lot
thing,
of OS X in your assessments.
Yeah,
well, maybe that's why it helps him, right?
You look at exploit brokers; they're offering to buy Mac OS vulnerabilities at decent prices. Not iOS prices, but. So that also shows that there's a market share for advanced adversaries developing offensive cyber capabilities to that. So I think that's just another data point. If someone is unsure about the threats faced by macOS users.
Looks like
Lee.
Then I got one.
I actually kind of had a two-parter. One is, I think also if you look at the security bulletins that come out with the updates for Apple, where they list, the 34 to 50 CVEs in an update, that's pretty significant with the sources of where they came from. A number of them come from like Project Zero and other resources. And then there's that crazy researcher that comes up a lot, Anonymous. I don't know. That's some weird hacker handle, I guess. The second part of my question was to ask you, have you been able to find a path to get something you found into that list so we would see you attributed there?
Yeah. So first part, definitely that's a really good point about looking at the security bulletins that Apple publishes, because there's, every one they come out is like riddled with a ton of highly impactful security bugs, a lot of them remotely exploitable, a lot of them impacting core components of the operating system. Now Apple is adding, we've seen exploited in the wild. And I think that's a good thing because it, again, reiterates the point that adversaries are targeting and successfully targeting macOS, sometimes with sophisticated exploits. I have reported bugs to Apple in the past, and generally they assign CVEs. Sometimes I have to go back and I'm like, hey, I saw you patch this. Can I at least get a shout out? Because you're not giving me any money. And they're like, oh yeah, I'm so sorry. This happened like 3 or 4 times. I was like, guys, come on.
No more CVEs for you.
Yes, but there are a handful of CVEs attributed to me. The funny thing is that of the CVEs I've reported, I would say roughly half of them are similar to other vulnerabilities, either ones I reported or other security researchers have reported, where the patch that Apple has employed is insufficient. And, this is, again, incredibly frustrating. You have a security researcher, even myself, reporting a vulnerability. Apple patches the one very specific code path without fixing or addressing the more systemic underlying flaw. And I get it. Sometimes that takes a lot of re-architecting, and it's a lot of work. Especially I like to focus on logic flaws or kind of architectural flaws. Frustrating though, because they're like, yeah, we patched it, you're good. And you're like, well, if I change these 2 bytes, I can re-trigger the same flaw. And the good thing is then you get another CVE, but again, it's a little disheartening to see that was their approach. I don't know if they're better at it now, but for a while it was like, basically every time I reported a CVE, I was like, I know I can get 2 out of this because they're going to mess up the patch.
Nice. So clearly, coming out of the Maxer invulnerable mindset at the beginning of the show, back when we started seeing this under Windows, it was you had an AV product, and you had a Windows firewall product, and you had some full disk encryption and all that type of stuff. And we've evolved with Windows. We've got our full endpoint protection suite. Yeah, it sounds like some of that is still the case for the consumer, maybe not the enterprise. And what does that landscape look like, and who are the good players for an EDR from
that's a great question, because as you mentioned with Microsoft, we really have seen them kind of dive into security in the sense of providing security products. They also do that with enterprise products. Apple kind of takes this other approach that says, hey, we're going to build great hardware and a good operating system, but we're going to defer to that. I think looking at like how Macs are managed in the enterprise, right? There's like MDM providers that are third-party providers that have really close relationships to Apple, where Apple's basically said, hey, we don't want to, do this ourselves. We'll hand it off to you. We'll push customers your way. And it's great. It works out well for everyone, I think. And keeps Apple from having to develop enterprise software, which is probably something they don't want to do anyways. In terms of, the EDR products and kind of my favorite, I really think, as we talked about earlier, it's really important to look for ones that make macOS a priority or fundamentally understand that it's totally different. Yes, there's some foundational concepts that apply, but the infection vectors, the persistence mechanisms, the payloads, the privilege escalation paths, totally different. I mean, it's a totally different operating system. I'm a big fan of Jamf Protect. I will caveat that I used to work at Jamf and I wrote that product. But the cool thing about it, it was derived from a lot of the same technology from the free open source Objective-C tools, which have now been around for 5-6 years, and I think have proven themselves in their abilities to detect new malware. They're more behavioral based. So even if Apple has notarized something or the malware has been recompiled, the system can still pick that up because it's more triggering on that. Jamf also does Mac-specific stuff and has always. So they're definitely kind of experts in that space. Again, I am biased, but I think that is still an objective statement. If you're interested in an enterprise security product, check out Jamf Protect. How's that for a sales pitch?
So what about for my mom, who may not be in enterprise?
Yes. So there are some really good user ones as well. I'm a big fan of Malwarebytes. They seem to be, again, one of those companies that have really put a lot of time and effort into their Mac product. So it's not like it's a second-class citizen, where for a lot of the other AV companies that kind of feels the case. They're publishing great research, finding new Mac malware specimens. So that to me is a good example. You can kind of look at who's detecting the new Mac malware, who's giving conference talks about that, who's publishing reports on that, and then see where they work, because if it shows that company is invested in Mac OS. And a lot of companies are kind of dabbling in it now, but it's like almost because I feel like their sales team says, oh, Mac's at 20%, so let's put 20% of our time and resources into building a Mac security product. Like, you really don't want to be running a security product that was, a 20% investment. You want kind of all in, I would argue.
Okay. Patrick, do you look into Safari at all? I feel like the pwn-to-own competition always has some kind of vulnerability and associated exploit for Safari. We've seen V8 and Chrome still to this day being abused. Is Safari on your roadmap? How are your feelings about Safari, its security, and how much attention should we be paying to it?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because I recently switched to using Safari. So if any hackers are listening, send me your Safari payloads. I think Chrome, in a nutshell, is more secure. I mean, they obviously put a ton of time and effort into securing that browser. Any browser is going to have vulnerabilities. Browsers are just such a vast attack surface that even the best engineered browser is going to have some security flaws. I look at exploit prices as kind of a good metric, and talking to customers, looking at exploit prices, Chrome ones are really valued. So I think that's testament to the security of the system. Why did I switch to Safari? From a privacy point of view, it was really a no-brainer. We can harp on Apple for their lack of security, but I think in terms of privacy, they do a really good job.
Yeah,
so, for me, the fact that on the back end, I don't know what Google's doing with all my data and searches, and I guess I still use Gmail, but, Safari I like some of their new approaches to, anti-tracking. They're talking about blocking, all this ads and that kind of stuff. And the reason they can do that is because Apple doesn't have to make money off that. They can give you a free browser because they just sold you a $1,500 laptop. Like Google can't really do that. They have to recoup their costs somehow. And they do that with advertising and mining your data. So in a nutshell, I really think Chrome is probably the more secure browser. But from a privacy point of view, for me, it was a no-brainer to kind of go with Safari. And Apple is doing a better job sandboxing it. But, you look at pretty much any of Apple's security documents that come out for new versions of the operating systems, the pwn-to-own competitions, there's a lot of Safari bugs in there. So it's always kind of like privacy or security. Unfortunately, I don't know if you can have both in this case.
I've had that some of those experiences, and for me, one of the parts about the Apple stuff that it just works has been incredibly frustrating for me for a move to Safari. I found that my banking website just eats it on Firefox and Chrome, doesn't work 92% of the time. But on Safari, it works every time, except that every time I log in, it tells me, hey, this website wants to know your location. Remember the setting for 1 day.
That's so annoying.
I just want to turn that off forever.
I know.
You can't.
See, they're
I was wondering about that. I was like, even Chrome allows you to be like, don't ask me again if I recall.
Let's put it this way. If it exists, I have not found it. Because it just works. Not how I want it.
I see Apple getting rid of Safari at some point, just like Microsoft did with IE. They're just going to say, you know what, we're not in the browser game. Let those guys do it.
We're going to build it off of Chromium.
Peace out.
Yeah, we're going to build it off of Chromium. Yeah.
I will say I really like Edge, though. Does Edge have a Mac OS build?
Yep, it does.
Well, they have a Linux build, and I actually, very bizarre, I run Edge on Linux. And I actually kind of like it.
Well, it's Chromium.
It's Chromium. Yeah, it's Chromium based. So yeah,
Chromium.
Yep.
Works good. One of the questions I had, we were talking about, EDR for my mom, as it were. One of the challenges I've seen in the enterprise is that as you move OS versions forward, the EDR port really isn't doing things the Mac way, so you have to wait, which is you can delay rollout to a newer OS at an enterprise, but with my mom, she's going to click I've got an update, and then it breaks her EDR. Is there anyone you think really understands the Mac way of doing that, or is everybody equally immature or frustrated?
Yeah, that's a really excellent point, because you run into this conundrum where your EDR product is holding you back from upgrading, which is kind of like the last thing it should be doing, because first thing I always tell people is always run the latest version of the operating system, because there is a myriad of exploitable bugs that have been patched. So do that before anything else. So again, if your EDR product is holding you back from that, I think it's inexcusable. So what we did when we were building Jamf Protect is we said, hey, we are going to do this the Apple way. We're going to only leverage Apple supported frameworks. We're going to do everything in user mode. We're going to leverage, the new endpoint security framework. And the benefit of that is it's day zero ready without, we didn't have to do anything. Like Mac OS 10.15 came out and it just worked because we had subscribed to the Apple way. So again, this goes back to that discussion of security tools that are written for Mac OS. Take a deep understanding of Mac OS. And as you mentioned, if they don't conform to the Apple way, they're going to be left in the dust, which is going to impact users and those in the enterprise, putting them at risk, which again, I think is inexcusable. But the only way to do the Apple way is for you to really be, kind of a hardcore Apple developer and keep abreast with their new frameworks and understand, talk to them and kind of conform to their ways for better or worse. We're seeing EDR vendors trying to play catch up with that now, especially as kernel extensions are being deprecated. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, I think it's inexcusable because there are right ways to do this and, that aren't that complicated if you put in the time and effort. Again,
I was just going to ask you what the impact of getting rid of kernel extensions was, as well as by default, things don't have full disk access, which is kind of interesting if you're trying to scan for malicious content.
Yeah. And that's a great question and something that I had to struggle with my tools. I write this free open source firewall called Lulu, and it ran as an NKE, a network kernel extension, which was the, at the time, supported way to filter packets in the kernel. Apple deprecated kernel extensions and provided the network endpoint framework network extension framework. User mode framework, and provided a lot of the same opportunities. So I had to spend a lot of time and effort porting my code to use this new framework. There were a host of other benefits, but there was a significant amount of time involved in that, a few hundred hours. But moving forward, it's great because it works. Problem was this network extension framework was really buggy. What Apple did is they had it on iOS and basically ported it over to Mac OS without considering the myriad of corner cases. Like on Mac OS, there's multiple users. So what happens when user A logs out or fast switches to user B? Caused all these problems. They also had kernel bugs that could be triggered from user mode by this framework. So I get nasty emails like, hey, your thing crashed my system. I'm like, I know like Lulu was, ultimately responsible or triggered it, but come on, this is Apple's code. Like I can't do anything about it. Good news is now in 11.5, I find like they finally got it into play. Another example was if there was two products using the network extension framework, it would cause all sorts of network issues. Because again, on iOS, that's not something they had supported, and when they ported it over to Mac OS. So I think it's ultimately good that they deprecated kernel extensions, but again, some of their replacements were really difficult to work with until they ironed out a lot of bugs. So, moving forward, I hope if Apple kind of does these large deprecations, the solutions they provide are hopefully a little robust because, that was a painful year or so where you got a lot of not nasty emails, but like a lot of GitHub bug reports. And I'm just like, you have to go to Apple because this is in their framework and I'm so sorry. It was a good exercise in empathy, but at the end of the day, I was just like, damn it, Cupertino, get your shit together.
So wasn't there an odd behavior in that network framework that it automatically trusted stuff from Apple, but not others so that you couldn't shut down?
That's Apple a great point. So that was insane. So, you have your network kernel extension, so my firewall, and it can block all network traffic, which is good. Sometimes you want to do that. You might be, tethered to your phone and you don't want the operating system downloading a 2 gig update. And so while reverse engineering the new framework, I was like, wait, there's this big exception list where they're basically whitelisting or permitting all these Apple daemons and applications to actually circumvent or sidestep the new network extension framework. And like if you would just dump all the network traffic that was routed through this extension into your firewall, you would not even see that. The operating system would just not route that traffic. And so there's obviously like privacy issues here, there's usability issues, and it took me like 10 minutes to find a way for malware to leverage or piggyback on one of these trusted system daemons and applications. So for a time, it like made any third-party firewall essentially useless because malware could simply, circumvent it by leveraging Apple's exception list. So luckily, we made a lot of bad press, and that's the one thing that gets Apple to change their mind. And so ultimately, they, revoked or removed that exception list and said something like, "Oh, it was never supposed to make it into production," which I was like, bullshit. But a good end to the story is they ultimately removed that. But again, that was really shocking that they deprecated kernel extensions, and then the solution they handed to third-party developers for firewall products, for example, was super buggy and like had a backdoor built in it. And you're like, guys, come on, like this is not cool.
Patrick, I just have 5 questions left for you. They're silly questions. Are you ready to play 5 questions with Security Weekly?
Yes.
3 words to describe yourself.
Passionate, surfer, nap lover.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
I would say a sniper rifle.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Talking nerdy.
Your favorite hacker movie?
Ooh, I'm going to say Swordfish, and I know people are going to talk shit about this, but it's so entertaining.
Yes. I like movies for entertainment. I like movies for entertainment, so that's cool.
It's good entertaining.
And ready, watch this. Go ahead.
Choose 2 celebrities, rather, not 3. 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Otherwise.
I get to lip sync that one.
Man. I would say having Obama as a dad. I mean, he was kind of a celebrity.
Yeah,
would be awesome. And for my mom, I would say the Queen of England because she's never going to die.
Whoa.
Oh, that's good.
I like it's a great pair. Patrick, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. I greatly enjoyed the conversation.
It's awesome.
Thank you again for having me on. It's great to chat with you. I think we covered some super interesting topics. Great questions. Love to be back anytime.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Patrick. With that, we'll take a short break. Come back with the security news for this week. Stay tuned. Keeping up with security issues across thousands of web assets without the right approach to web application security is a daunting task. Get ahead with web vulnerability scanning automation from NetSparker, a leader in dynamic and interactive application security testing known for its ease of use and accurate results. Detect a wide range of vulnerabilities in all legacy and modern web applications, address security bugs at scale by automating the confirmation process, automatically prioritize vulnerabilities, and assign actionable tickets to the right developers in their native workflows for rapid remediation. For more information on how to scale application security with ease, visit securityweekly.com/NetSparker. Welcome back, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly. InfoSec World 2021 is proud to announce its keynote lineup for this year's in-person event. Hear from Robert Herjavec, heads of security at the NFL, TikTok, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, Stanford University, and more. Security Weekly listeners save 20% on a World Pass and main conference registration by visiting securityweekly.com/ISW 2021. Also, if you missed any of our previously recorded webcasts or technical training, they're available for your viewing pleasure at securityweekly.com/on-demand. On to the security news. Mr. Joff Thayer is here with us. Joff, welcome.
Hello, it's good to be here. I have not seen everybody for a couple of 3 weeks or so. So again, and that's my bad. So it's good to be here. Good to see everybody.
Yeah, things happening at Black Hills Information Security. You're teaching.
Teaching, yeah. In fact, I'm getting ready to crank up another iteration of the C2 class, as I call it, next week, which is Jesus, what is the title of that thing? That's terrible.
Joff C2 class. You should take it because it's effing awesome. That's what it is.
Yeah, that's really what the class is called. But automating information security, no, that's the other one. Let's see, what is I seriously have had a total brain fart on that because I just call it Joff C2 class. But no, it's called Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development. There it is.
Yes,
that's a mouthful.
Yes.
It's a mouthful.
Enterprise Attacker Emulation and C2 Implant Development.
Man, you should make an acronym for that or something.
Yeah, well, I actually just call it EAE C2 or Joff C2 class.
You should, you're going to have to make some flashcards to hold up during the show, so people with a QR code on it, so people can just scan it.
Oh yeah. So hey, don't be social engineered, but scan this.
And
our users will never be fooled.
Wild West Hack and Fest is happening September 21st through the 24th with training and conference. And is my understanding that's virtual?
It just went virtual.
It is. It's just gone completely virtual, and I do. There's very, very good reasons for that. We actually had a number of people come down with COVID in South Dakota, and so I think the bike rally spiked.
Yep, Sturgis.
The COVID cases in South Dakota, and we were very, very concerned about that. So we've converted it to all virtual. I'll be teaching again enterprise attacker emulation and C2 implant development in a this time it's going to be in a 2-day format. When we do, it was going to be hybrid live virtual, and so I do teach it in a 2-day format there, but normally we teach it in a 4-hour format. We're kind of disappointed that we had to go all virtual, but there were very, very good reasons for it, and there were significant health concerns, and so we had to make the decision. So there you go. The other thing is, I will say, just at the end of July, which is now nearly a month ago, I taught the regular expression 4-hour session again. That was absolutely phenomenally successful. Boy, that's a long word. And I'm planning on doing more of that this year. So hopefully we'll have few more rounds of that. It's a lot of fun doing the regular expression.
You know what's funny? The intern comes to me today. He's like, so I think I started editing in VI because it wasn't Nano. And he's like, how do you exit? I'm like, now's probably a good time for me to give you the crash course in VI. And I'm like, dude, you're gonna have to work at it. It's not just something like you take lightly and you just kind of like, you're gonna have to work at it. Not gonna lie. Come to me with questions. You know, here's the guide and here's the 10-minute tour of VI. And I'm like, I even only know a certain percentage of commands, and I could probably spend more time learning more stuff. And it's fun. I had to actually think about what some of those commands are because they're such muscle memory. And I was also showing him how you can run, quick regular expressions in search and replace.
I mean, who doesn't want to type : dot comma dot plus 5 s slash? Right? I mean, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
it just rolls off the tongue, right?
Yeah. And off the fingers.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, if we're doing some plugs there, Sec 556, the IoT hacking course that I just finished up with my good friends, is available for registration. The alpha course in September. The beta course, meaning we're going to have a test run. First time it's ever being taught. You get it half off.
Hot diggity.
Yeah, sans.org/sec 556. So
is the beta version a full 5-day course, or is it fewer days?
The beta version, so the current iteration is 3 days.
Nice.
Okay.
Is
it going to be longer?
That's what there is some discussion about making it longer into a either 5 or 6 day format. That also said, it is my understanding is that if you take the 3-day version and you wish to, if and when it gets updated to 5 or 6 days, and you wish to take it, you get an alumni rate of effectively 50% off. Meaning, you take 3 days and they added 3 days. Well, you've already had 3 days of that content. Well, great, makes for a great refresher, and you get
the new content.
The other 3 days at the reduced rate.
New to you content.
And I just have to say, knowing Larry, it's going to be freaking awesome. So
absolutely,
I think it'll be a whole lot of fun, man. I'm sure you have worked really, really hard to get it to this place, and I'm excited for you.
And you're still teaching the wireless course as well?
Yes, absolutely. And both of those kits are some of the very limited at SANS that you get hardware to take home and practice and your attack targets and all sorts of stuff. The 556 kit, which we've referred to as the SIPT. So the wireless kit is the GIAC auditing wireless toolkit. And then for the IoT class, it is the SIPT kit. So the SANS IoT Ponage Toolkit, pronounced SIPT. SIPT. Yep. So you get a Raspberry Pi. You get a logic analyzer.
Which model Raspberry Pi?
For Raspberry Pi 4, the 2 gig version, because that's really all we need.
Sure.
SD card with custom image, a logic analyzer, a Bus Pirate version 3.6, some software-defined radio with a HackRF1 and antenna.
And which Wi-Fi card are you giving out with that class?
We're doing the Panda wireless card.
The
PAU06 currently.
Is that an Atheros?
It is not. It's Realtek.
Okay.
But
obviously it supports monitor mode.
It does, and
I had to do that today.
It's not a ton of focus for the class. It's only a small part. So, but yeah, we do some.
I
Wi-Fi
do that
stuff.
today. You'd be proud of me. I hadn't done a lot of wireless stuff like that in a while, and I successfully put a card in monitor mode and got it to work with Enzyme. I will share my notes with you.
So did you use IW?
I used IW.
Sweet, because IW config.
Yes, no, it was IW was the or IP link. IP space link.
So they've done the same thing as they did with IF config then.
Yeah,
right?
no more IF config and IW config. It's all IP and IW now.
Right. Yeah, I'll share my notes with you for our listeners.
Sweet.
Larry and I are going to be talking about Enzyme coming up and I did some work on that, and I'll share my notes with you. And Larry and I are going to converge on I believe it's been scheduled. It's about a month from now. Larry and I will converge on that. So fun stuff.
Anything, Larry, in that course that you were just freaking amazed you were able to pull it off and get it in the course?
Bots? Arguably the entire hardware hacking section is freaking amazing. The fact that I also we are going to do some capture and replay attacks with software-defined radio, and like pull some of that stuff out, do the analysis. Like the tools for doing that nowadays are so much better.
Damn it.
Yeah.
I'm like going, damn it, because it's like, I want to take the course. I hope everybody listening does too. But
yeah,
I don't know if I can pull it off. I love the idea of
the software-defined radio is only going to get better as we refine the course. The hardware hacking stuff, I think, is just going to be insane. And should we turn it into a 6-day course, it's only going to get better.
But of course.
Yeah.
Maintaining labs is always tough, though, right, Larry?
Yeah, and especially when there's hardware involved with those labs. Like, we have to have an attack target, and you have to be able to buy it, and it has to be reasonably priced, and there has to be it has to be vulnerable in some way. Like, finding that attack target is hard. Because then like 6 months later, it changes. Like, in reality, what we need to do is we need to build a platform that we can attack and have it emulated or simulated, and that's almost as hard as finding something you can actually attack. Paul,
I wanted to go to my story number 23.
Good God,
Jeff,
23 stories?
Yeah, Jeff, we talked about fully homomorphic encryption.
Fully what now?
Homomorphic encryption. Okay. Where the data stays only you can decrypt the data, even if you share it with someone else. That someone else or application or process can perform operations on that data and then share back with you the results in encrypted format. It's a really amazing concept. And I think the last time we talked about it, we're kind of like, we didn't truly understand maybe what some of the use cases might be. So I found a different article, my story number 23, which I thought did a much better job in the other articles that I've read than the other articles I read about describing fully homomorphic encryption. I think it put it in much easier to understand terms. Author did a great job, and also listed out the use cases. And my whole thing, like, he talks about preventative medicine, taking operations on that data to do analysis, that they don't need to necessarily see all the clear text data to derive answers, right, to share back with you. The same thing with facial recognition. That operation can be done without them really knowing what face looks like, just operating on the essentially encrypted data, from what I understand. And also voice assistants, I thought was the best example that you could probably describe to your average everyday person not in technology that doesn't understand encryption. I only understand it to a certain level, as many of our listeners know. I know my boundaries. Sometimes I overstep them, and our listeners call us out, as you should. Absolutely. Please do that. But voice assistants, right? Every time you speak and an assistant analyzes your voice, do they really need to see exact or read the text, or can they perform operations on it without necessarily...
Do they need to hear your voice, or they just need to hear what your voice...
It has a signature for it.
Yeah, it has a signature for it.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that was good. I also want to say, like, the article title is "People Shouldn't Care About Privacy," and I think that the pitch is, since we have fully homomorphic encryption, we can achieve true privacy. And I'd argue that the use cases presented to me make perfect sense. But there's a lot of use cases where it's going to fall down and you need access to the clear text data in order to perform options on it.
Based on sort of what you're just describing, Paul, Jeff, I'm going to jump in here for a quick second.
Sure,
I think that the fully homomorphic encryption is an amazing application for us to be properly securing biometrics for authentication, because we've talked about how long passwords have been crap for, and now passwords with two-factor is where we're at, and we're finding that two-factor is starting to not do as great a job as we really thought. Right. It's not the panacea we thought it would be, but everyone has been largely reticent to go to some sort of biometric wholeheartedly because, well, great, you get my biometric data and you steal my fingerprint. Well, yeah, let's go change my password.
Yeah, it's essentially a password that can't be changed, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I'll just use this finger. This finger.
Yeah.
Right. And then what happens when that one gets leaked?
Right.
Like, yeah. I think
a first world problem, right? I mean, it sucks when you run out of fingers.
Yeah. So you got to use other appendages that stick out, like your earlobes, Jeff, or your nose.
Your nose, yeah.
You see where I was good, Jeff.
So I read the article, and I agree with you. It was much more detailed. and yes, they did describe use cases, but the detailed description of illustrating homomorphic encryption by using pictures and adding to the picture so that when you eventually decrypt it, it's changed, that doesn't, in my mind, connect to the use cases. I mean, it's like completely different. It's like, okay, you're going down this path of describing all this cool stuff you can do, and then you talk about use cases that are completely different. I'm sure they get it in their minds. It's just not coming through to me. The neatest thing in the article, if you're willing to click on the link, is they've got like a, what did they call it? It's like a little 6-minute do-it-yourself AI test. They call it the 6-minute guide to end-to-end encryption. Try it out for yourself. So I guess you can upload an image and do something with it, and while it's still encrypted, it'll come back different, which again sounds really cool. The biggest takeaway I got from this article is just sort of the whole premise of with end-to-end encryption, you're cutting out the potential for a nation-state middleman, big brother, backdoor type of oversight that's still getting access to your data, which is what a lot of privacy people ultimately worry about. That part I get. I don't get but the basis of cryptography is to eliminate all the characteristics of the underlying plain text or data. So that's where I still I don't get what they're saying here in terms of being able to use it and manipulate it, other than it seems to be from I was having a conversation the other day about this with somebody. It might have been on my show. I forget. But the idea that it's all about data analytics and big data, and you still want to be able to do all that stuff you do to glean useful information for companies that want to know how to restock the shelves and what coupons to send to people. Those are the use cases that we usually hear about. So I'll keep reading. I'm talking to a mathematician that supposedly is. I asked him to explain it to me, and he's like, "Let me write a paper," and I'm still waiting.
Oh shit! Oh no.
So once I I need to ping him. It's been a while.
Yeah.
I want to see how well he's doing, and once he shares that with me, and I absorb it and hopefully understand it, maybe we'll have him on the show to explain it sometime.
We do have goals to talk more in depth about encryption topics with subject matter experts within our own ranks, as it were, as well as others in the community that can help us. For example, I was trying to find the key that went with a certificate in SSL, and there's a very documented OpenSSL command that uses the modulus to compute that. And at a high level, I'm like, oh, okay, like I get it, and I can run these commands and use them. I'm like, I don't understand how all the math works behind that. I'm like,
right,
whoa. I need someone to explain that to me, because like, whoa.
But I bet Tyler and I might have worked with somebody who could probably do that.
Yeah. There's people out there that can do it. And again, these are, it was Dimitri that said, one of our listeners was like, some of it's the kind of thing you study for the test and you memorize it and you feel like you know it, but then like you don't really use it down to that level on an everyday basis, and so you forget.
Yep, and that's what Google's for.
Why do you need to learn calculus when you've got a calculator? You just know which button.
When will I ever need to use geometry? All the goddamn time.
Oh yeah,
you're building a cabin.
You're building something in your house. That's when you end up using geometry
figure out
again.
The pitch of a roof.
Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say pitch of a roof is the classic. Example. You done any solar? You're going to use geometry,
right? Or stairs. Building any kind of stairs.
Funny story about that. When I built my cabin many years ago and got ready to start doing the roof and was trying to figure out the angles to cut and everything, and I'm like, oh, it's geometry. So I get out, pad of paper, and I'm writing all this stuff down. And at some point, I said, there ain't no way. I see people, and I don't want to be disparaging to construction workers and carpenters.
Right. But they're not breaking out the pad and paper.
Yeah.
But no, they're not doing things with calculators and slide rules and everything. And I asked a friend of mine who's a carpenter. He's like, "Oh, you just need a carpenter's square.
You need a speed square. Yeah,
a triangle."
Yeah.
And he's like, pitch of a roof, 4-3, find a fourth, find a 3, line it up, draw a line, you're done. I'm like, oh, it's magic.
See, when I did mine, the little cottage shed thing that we built, like we had some weird angles and the pitch is off. And you know what I did? We had the knee wall built and we had the roof built. So I take the 2x6 and I put it on the roof and I take the square and I go zip, zip, and then I throw it off the shed and I go cut it with the saw right where those lines were. Math? Nope, I can draw a line.
Right. Nope.
It's magical.
Use your hacker skills.
Yep. Zip.
Anyway.
Speaking of using your hacker skills, there's one that I think we would be very remiss if we didn't discuss.
The Razor mouse.
Bingo! Nailed it.
So this is essentially like
so well.
Plug in, but now this requires physical access because I have to plug the mouse in. The mouse drivers automatically get loaded. Inside those mouse drivers, there's a point in the install where I can right-click and open up a PowerShell prompt in a system.
And even better, it uses Microsoft's Windows Update mechanism. You plug it in, and Windows goes, hey, you've got a new mouse. Hey, go get this from Razer.
Go get that driver.
Yep, go get that driver. Here's the install thing.
Not just the driver, but the installation program.
Is that a hidden PID ID that it calls?
Yes, it is.
That was with a user on Twitter.
Yep.
That I linked to in the show notes to give credit where credit is due, whose theory was, well, can I just use a rubber ducky?
It's not a theory.
You can.
You could use an ATT Tiny 85, which is a little USB thing that you can use for USB hidden, have it inject keystrokes, super tiny. If I remember correctly, this is what's the bad USB is based around.
And that's just because the operating system, I mean, Linux, Windows, macOS, doesn't matter.
Yep.
When you plug in a USB device, reads the
UID, the
certain
USB
fields, like the UID field.
Yep, the manufacturer and the device identifier.
And based on that, the operating system makes the determination that it's this type of device.
Yep, exactly. So the ATT Tiny 85, I was having a conversation with one of our folks, Faith, yesterday about that USB is actually not implemented in the ATT Tiny 85. It's emulated. It's all in software. And it bit bangs the speed and everything at every communication. It calculates that. And you can, with that, because it's all emulated, it's all done in software, you can be any USB device.
I got you.
And they cost about, if you buy them in quantity, like of 5, they're about $1 a piece.
Yeah. Well, and that makes perfect sense because oftentimes in Linux, what I get is the misinterpretation of what those fields are when a USB device registers, and Linux gets confused. Microsoft has done a better job because they work more closely with manufacturers, give them libraries to abide by, where that data is interpreted more reliably than it would be in an open environment like Linux, where there's a bunch of kernel developers that are writing device drivers and have to interpret that in a more open kind of not as structured environment as you have. Well, I'm certain in Mac OS, right? It's probably more highly structured than in Windows, although your device support may not be as vast as it is. Like, I feel like Windows, you can plug in like virtually any USB device and Windows is just going to figure it out. The drivers are going to work way better. Yep. And that when we do the 617 course and all the hardware that I buy, so much of the hardware still comes with the CDs with the drivers on it. Yeah, where's the... And they're little tiny CDs. And they're like they're mini CDs that you put it. And the only DVD drive or CD drive that I have at home is a slot load. And I'm like, nope, that breaks. That's not going to work. That's not going to work. So
I have a DVD driver USB. I've got a 3.5-inch floppy drive USB.
Oh, you have a reader for the 3D printed save icons? Yeah. Does yours have a tray that pops out of the CD so it can take a full size CD or a mini? What do they call the smaller size CD that comes with a lot of the things you're talking about, Larry? Mini or micro? Mini CD. Is it called a mini CD? It is. They have micros too.
I'd have to plug it in to power it up. But wait,
does it have a tray or does it just have a slot?
See, now the big thing that I've not seen anybody talk about. This, Tyler. The big thing with this Razer vulnerability that I haven't seen anybody talk about yet is the potential and possibility to emulate things to virtual and VDI environments.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You can do some interesting things with pass-through for virtual environments and using VMware Tools library. So that's kind of been our big focus, is looking at how we can leverage some of the virtualized side of this for breakouts and or system access.
And you can automate that right-click open PowerShell window here in software, I would imagine, right? It is in the GUI.
It's an API call, yeah.
I gotcha.
The software's just running under
running the
system.
API call, yeah.
Yep. And I think that maybe we have glossed over that part. By plugging in this device, Windows recognizes it as a Razer mouse. Windows Update says, hey, you've got new hardware. Go over to Razer, get this installer, and the installer runs a system. And when you're in the installer, you can basically right-click and tell it to run PowerShell here from that application, inheriting the rights of that application running a system.
Yep.
Oops.
What could possibly go wrong?
Nothing. Tyler, have you got a chance to use it yet?
What's that? I think you're muted.
That was a yes. No.
He's muted.
What?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
It was a very nice means. I've got 2 Razer mice here that I leveraged and did a pass-through for an engagement. So
I know of a company that has done similar, that went down to the local Newegg or whichever Best Buy, and they had them in stock and grabbed one and was working on an assessment for one of those devices, and game over, man. Yep.
It kind of feels like cheating because it is so stupid easy, but it is nice.
but it's yeah, I mean, it is stupid easy, agreed, but for how many years have we talked about limiting the devices that you can plug into your organizational devices, your organizational systems by, hey, we only allow, these specific USB thumb drives from these manufacturers because they can be secured, and we only allow these keyboard and the mice because we've audited the process.
But it sounds like that's totally spoofable, so...
But if you have endpoint protection that only allows certain PIDs and
so don't allow Razer mice. But then you've got the support nightmare where I'm traveling, I need a mouse.
Sorry,
and
not on your enterprise device. You don't. You got to get a trackpad that's there. Use it.
Yeah, I mean,
that's tricky.
It limits your attack surface, right? From like a red team standpoint, we always look up like, what manufacturers do these people use? What kind of computers do they use? We program all of our vids and PIDs to match those. Look for anybody using certain hardware with inside a picture, social media. Like, all those things are things you take into consideration, you program for.
Yep.
That's probably a little bit more advanced than the drive-by attack, random attacker doing it. So you're just limiting that defense in depth and attack surface.
Yep.
I think we got a little feedback on Discord that many of those things ignore the keyboard and mouse.
For just the support reasons, right?
Yeah, and from thinking about that back in the day, you could actually specifically some of the stuff that I worked with. It was a pain in the ass to manage, but you could allow only, as opposed to a block list, you could do an allow list.
Yeah,
and that would be good. So.
That's hard to that's hard to maintain. I can't. Yeah. If I'm the CISO, I have a tough time putting that policy in place and selling that to my board management and all of my users. But I get it. Like, I would also implement a policy that's like, you can't use wireless keyboards, especially. But enforcing that in the real world, that's hard. Someone's just going to get a Bluetooth keyboard. Then what do you do? Like, I don't know. I think that's a losing battle from a defender perspective.
Some of those restrictions, they have to be for specific scenarios with specific risk profile.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I mean, we have some systems I can really restrict the USB peripherals, and some people have gone so far as to put glue in the USB ports, which we don't allow anymore. But that's not a huge chunk of systems. There's very specific mission for those systems.
Yeah, you work backwards, right? Like your critical assets. You start with the critical assets that shouldn't have things plugged into it, and they have very specific data sets in it. And you work backwards and just fix those. The rest of the users, you're going to take a business risk and a kind of an assumed risk around physical access and hope that you've got other controls and mitigations in place.
Yeah, but be careful on your servers, Tyler. If you're limiting the devices to be plugged in, you get ransomware and you need to go recover, and you're like, wait, I don't have one of the approved keyboards handy, and Amazon's or Best Buy's out of stock. Now you've just shot yourself in the foot.
Time to go dumpster diving.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I know how that goes. I mean, especially today, ordering stuff, in the pandemic world, like what's available and what's not is a crapshoot today. Like keyboards, we're talking about keyboards, right? Keyboards, I'm like, we need some more extra keyboards here in the studio. Like we built a bunch of systems. We use the keyboards we have. Like I want to go buy I bought a batch of them. I'm like, these work great. It was a reasonable price because I need to buy 2 or 4, at a clip because they come in sets of 2. And then I go order it again because I'm like, I want 2 more. It was like $20, $30 for 2 keyboards. I'm like, perfect. I need them for labs. No, that's not available anymore. So I had to buy a different brand. You know what I mean? Like, you get into this kind of whitelisting and however you want to call it, allow list, blacklist for these USB devices. It gets tricky. It gets
Agreed. Agreed.
Remember when it was just the old thing? Did you have one of those old keyboards that had that round connector, or did you have USB? Because usually you grab the wrong one out of the drawer.
Oh, which
some gamers still prefer that PS2 port for speed and responsiveness, right?
AT or PS2?
PS2 is the one I was referring to.
Yeah, see, when you had to have the AT to PS2 adapter.
Oh, man, I remember those.
And then when you had a USB keyboard and you needed the AT to PS2 to USB adapter.
Yeah.
Ask me how I know this.
Long string of adapters. A lot of gaming motherboards still come with that PS2 port on it for just that reason.
Yep.
Anyway, Linux attackers are taking advantage of unpatched vulnerabilities.
Which ones?
In other news,
water is wet.
Oh man!
Let me check the weather. It's dark.
Yes. So why are people still running these end-of-life versions of Linux distributions? I think we all know why, because they started out with an outdated image or misconfigured them, as the article says, and people never patched them. Why? Fear of breaking the application, and that's how we end up with legacy software. And Linux, I think, is particularly interesting to think about that, because if you've got that application that's using Linux or whatever, it could just be hanging out there. People don't maybe understand how it worked in the first place. They don't want to change it. They don't want to update it. And it's running Linux, and maybe you don't have a Linux admin anymore. Maybe that person left. So it's just, it's hanging out there.
So just a vector. That was pointed out to me by Goose that Linux just turned 30. Can you believe it?
Oh my God.
And I added an article to the show notes for this one. I'm just like, holy crap, I can't believe it's been 30 years since Linus Torvalds put out that free OS. Wasn't intended to be a mainstream. I don't think he intended it to get as big as it is.
Well, I mean, if we're, I don't know, but it was a kernel. So Linux kernel's 30 years old. A lot of those utilities predate the Linux kernel, right? And the distributions are really what put all those things together.
If the Linux kernel is 30 years old, do you know what that means?
We're old.
Linus Torvalds is old.
Yes.
Right.
I'm not old. Linus is old. Right.
Linux is all grown up, and so is Linus.
I don't know.
We talked about that last week. The audience got to hear our conversation with Wheel, and the Sequoia vulnerability that Wheel and team disclosed through Qualys. I was really excited to talk to Wheel in our prep call, because I'm like, this is a Linux vulnerability. I'm like, did you get to talk to Linus? I'm like, what did he say? Like, what was it like? Like, I was really kind of nerding out on it. And he's like, no, he's like, the public, he said in the interview, everyone, hopefully everyone listened to last week, that publicly sometimes Linus is really harsh, right? I think he's grown in the past 30 years. And also, Wheels, like, we contacted him privately. He's like, he was really nothing like that kind of public persona that he puts on. He was really appreciative of our work, and accepted our change. Like, oh, yep, that's an issue. He's like, yep, this kind of thing can happen, and it was just like really good to work with. I think that's talking to your article, Lee, really a maturity level that the Linux kernel and associated software like device drivers and other things that go into the kernel has reached today.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Lee just went all
cyborg on us.
Cyborg on us.
Lee went cyborg. Oh my God, he totally did.
You still there, Lee?
Exterminate.
I'm still here, but I don't know what's going on. I just focusing on Linux. I just remember that first call I got when my user had installed Linux on the machine, and we didn't support it. I had never seen it, and he had his disk integrity check wouldn't work, and I told him, I don't know anything about Linux, but try FSCK minus B32, and it came up. Just one of those weird crossover commands. Like you said, Paul, the commands are older than the kernel.
Yeah, the GNU utilities, yeah.
Well,
predate the kernel.
an FS check by moving to the next superblock is the ultimate answer, right?
And honestly, it sounded like Lee ran that command on his connection because he sounded better after that.
Yeah.
Did.
Yeah, Lee, I don't know, your audio device is kind of wigging out. Sometimes unplugging it, plug it back in works. We've had
I was going to try turning it off and on again.
Yeah, we've had some interesting issues. We had a webinar issue today with USB audio devices on Windows. Kind of weird.
Well, I turned on Lee's QoS with my C2 channel.
There you go.
Nice.
Nicely done.
Oh, was that why my light blinked?
I like to be helpful that way.
Love you, man. Appreciate it.
Jeff, I want to get your take on my article number 8. And the title was How Data Brokers Sell Access to the Backbone of the Internet. Essentially, what this article is talking about is internet service providers that have NetFlow data, who they share it with, who those people share it with, and how that data is used. Is it a privacy violation? Could it be used for bad? Could it be used for good? What I thought was interesting is how the... Team Simaru provided access to the Citizen Lab. I believe it was a Citizen Lab project. So they could conduct some research, which ultimately ended up being used for good. They needed to identify victims of Canadru's infrastructure in a project they worked on. And those of you that follow Citizen Lab, they do great work to highlight some of the nefarious things that are happening on not just the internet, but with cyber criminals in particular. And I thought it was interesting how NetFlow data could be used for bad and good, much like the tools we create can be used for bad or for good. And I think the article the title makes it seem like selling this data or access to this data is really bad. I'm like, not all the time, right?
Well, that's hard to tell, right? The first thing that people should realize is that NetFlow data is metadata. It's not a full packet contents, right? NetFlow data has always been essentially, in a communication, the sort of 5-tuple, right? It's the protocol, the source port, the source IP, destination port.
You mean it's like who called who on the telephone, not what they said? Because the NSA kind of got in trouble for that too.
That's the perfect analogy. That's the perfect analogy, right? So in a way, you're right. When I was involved back way long ago in some university research efforts, even though we had either shortened PCAP data, which was just like the first 60 bytes, 64 bytes, or we had NetFlow data, we were still asked to anonymize the source and destination with a recognizable tokenization of sorts, right? So that might be replacing the first 2 octets of the IP address to something else, or things like that, because it still has some privacy concerns, and it still is a record of the conversation from a metadata perspective. It's not an actual full transcription. So that's the thing, and it's always been kind of hotly debated as to whether you should distribute that data or not. It makes me a little nervous when major tier 1 ISPs are openly distributing that data, perhaps amongst each other and amongst other organizations. That's a very big deal, I think.
It was interesting at university.
Sorry, there was a bug.
It makes me remember. It brings up some things that conversations, and I think even like official policies, paperwork that I signed in agreement with the chief information officer at the university that was like, yes, Paul and his team, like this team, can collect full packet and other data on the network for the purposes of security monitoring, provided they protect that data. They don't share that data, and it's only used for identifying security breaches and security related incidents, and not to violate the privacy of the student body and or faculty. And we came, I even think, I want to say, to a written agreement where like, yes, we're going to grant you this authorization, and a lot of that was also covered on employee agreement, that like we're not going to be bad actors essentially and spy on people. Like there was kind of that, I don't know if we had to put that in writing or that was just assumed in our employment for the university, that we were going to be good people and not assholes, basically, right? Also, when we collected data and then we would go to, as you know, working for a university, we shared a lot of information in very not public forums, but semi-public forums with other universities, and then we would anonymize that data to a certain extent as well. I would imagine similar protocols are in place for this type of sharing with Team Simaru and others. Tyler's got this big grin on his face, like he's got some kind of comment or something on this. Tyler, what are your thoughts?
It may have also been the memes I was posting in Slack.
Oh, okay.
Just trying to help you out there, Tyler.
Thanks, man. This data's been around for a long time. Team Cumry does a fantastic job of curating this data.
What did you call them?
It's Team Cumry.
Cumry is what a lot of people call it, and I think that is the correct pronunciation. After I
said Simru. I always read that in my brain as Simru. I don't know that I ever actually verbalized it amongst peers, maybe. So,
Cumry?
Team Cumry. Yeah.
That's not how I would have pronounced it based on
me either. Okay. Me either. For many reasons.
Yes, for many reasons. Anyway,
the data sets are very, very vast. Like they collect pretty much everything at layer 3. You can correlate things from entry into a VPN, exit out of a VPN, entry into a Tor node, exit out of a Tor node. The data itself is like, it covers probably 97% of the internet. So these data sets exist. They've existed for a while. They're utilized and very heavily scrutinized as far as who has access to them. It's a substantial amount of money and investment to get access or partnership with some of these companies. But it's the correlation in the back end. This is just raw data. You're talking about a massive amount of data. They're only able to store or save up to like 3 months of data.
Yeah,
so your ability to ingest that data is highly dependent on what you can do with that data. And then the ability to correlate that raw data at layer 2 and 3 to other data, say like ad tracking data or mobile identification data. That's when it gets really, really interesting. And there's companies that hunt people utilizing these data sets. So yeah, there's some privacy concerns. Actually, but it's also
there's one more point. There's one more point that I feel like I should make, and on this topic. One is, it's not just up to OSI layer 3. It actually, usually NetFlow does go up to OSI layer 4, so it does include the protocol and then the port information.
Oh, you're right.
TCP and UDP. The other point is, it is very resource intensive for switching and routing devices to generate NetFlow data, and so it is often the case that it is sampled NetFlow data rather than real time, because real time is extremely difficult to produce. These devices have got a lot of other things to do, and so not that I'm saying
it is latency.
Impossible,
it is not sampled though.
Yeah, I imagine if you have dedicated devices, and they do exist, that they don't have to be sampled. But if they're coming off switching and routing devices, they generally do have to be sampled, because it's not possible to generate otherwise. So you're going to have a mix.
It's almost all backbone is pretty much where we'll say the majority of this data comes from.
Yes.
Yeah, and those routers have enough compute power to implement the routing protocols, which is their primary mission in life, which is very processor intensive, as well as collect the NetFlow data. However,
that's a maybe or maybe not. I mean,
but in my experience, like if push came to shove on these devices, they would stop logging in favor of supporting the routing protocols. At least the Cisco devices,
true,
right? Yeah,
but it's not it's not all that difficult to put an inline, tap of sorts that just generates net flow. That's not difficult to do.
Agreed. So. And a lot of ISPs would do that for troubleshooting purposes as well, and monitoring purposes for their own the health of their networks, right?
They absolutely
they almost have to at that point. 10 things you must do to avoid getting hacked. We all love these articles, don't we? I know, but I have to say, if we were to write this article, I think we would come up with some of the same points on here, because I see the headline and I'm like, ugh, this could be like, it's either one of three things. It's either a unicorn and I'm like, holy crap, it's a really good article, or it's like, well, it's not bad. And then the majority of the time, these articles are a complete shit show.
I wish I could reuld it, because
this one looks half reasonable.
I read the rest of the story with a free account.
Incognito mode. So it's not a bad list. So if I were to have a conversation with my users, I would probably talk about a lot of things in this list. Multi-factor authentication, using a password vault, keeping your software updated, using something other than SMS for your second factor, not installing random crap software from the internet and browser extensions is, I think, the thing that saves my family and probably a lot of our families, because they live with us. Yep. We tell them, if like you need something to go download it, like ask mom or dad first. Like, let's find the legitimate version of what you need to solve your problem, rather than just the first one or two clicks off of Google, because that could get you in trouble.
Yeah. We had this conversation in our house just the other day. Our 13-year-old daughter got a laptop to do some gaming and that type of stuff and streaming. She got that for Christmas, and she comes downstairs with her laptop the other day and she says, "Dad, I can't work on my summer book report because Google Docs won't allow me to edit this document because it says I need to disable my browser extensions because there's a bad one." And I'm like, well, okay, then that's interesting. So we go and look at all our extensions, and there are no browser extensions loaded in the interface. Well, digging in and so forth and so on, and turns out, Malwarebytes finds out that she has 22 pieces of malware on her system. And I'm like, okay. And I said, oh man, I can only imagine how many mommy has on her systems, because she doesn't have antivirus, and she does all these coupon things that you get down the shady.
Yeah, there's some dangerous add-ons for games and extensions for video games. Yeah.
So it became a challenge in the house. Like, Corinne had 22 pieces of malware on her system, and like, okay, let's see if mommy beats you. And we ran Malwarebytes on mommy's system, and one. Yep. One piece of malware on her system.
Been paying attention.
And it was coupon related.
Yeah.
So
probably some ad tracker, most likely.
Yep. Corinne won. She had 22 pieces, and you know what my answer was? Stop clicking shit.
Yeah.
And she's like, what? I didn't do anything. I'm like, it's a joke. Joke. You can thank
there's
Boris
definitely some good there's some good advice in here, plus links to a lot of the software that I would recommend. I mean, like Google Authenticator Duo, 1Password, LastPass. Like,
now this is it's an article. I was pretty impressed.
Yeah, great.
They hit some of the highlights that any of us would say.
Right, personally or for an enterprise, right? Like, this is advice we want our users to learn from and implement. Yeah.
I mean, I love that number one, right? A password manager app. Yeah, why not?
Well, and 1Password had some issues. SpectreOps did a little investigation. When you read this report, you realize it was not a little investigation. This took some time. And I think they rightfully pointed out that when you're discovering vulnerabilities, there is not just one path, but many paths.
This is your story number 27 for the record.
Yeah, story number 27. You go down these paths and you come up short until you find the right answer. And what a detailed post they put together.
I actually don't believe in password managers. I'll just put that out there, because I'm old school and think you should keep it in your brain.
You secretly have that. You secretly have that book that you picked up at the bookstore. That's a little notebook that says passwords on it. That's your password manager.
Keep it in my brain.
That's a lot.
Do I forget a lot of them? Yes.
Yes.
Well, am I locked out of a lot of sites that I only wanted to use once in the first place?
The exponential complexity factor for me is what was my username, and then if it was an email address, which email address it was. It's not so much. I could probably, if I came up with the right algorithm, Jeff, to your credit, right? Especially like given your background, you could train your brain to come up with an algorithm to remember passwords, but it's the exponential factor of like, what did I set as my username?
Yeah, the first one is, what the fuck is my username?
Yes.
And was it an email address, and which email address was it?
That's what makes it.
And which persona was it?
And then, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then it becomes, okay, which password was it? Shit.
But, I have one or two or three what I consider to be throwaway passwords, the ones that I don't, you need a password because you're clicking on something to do one time, and it's a throwaway. So I have throwaway passwords. The ones that I usually still use a good one.
Password one.
But put a space in there somewhere. But I mean, the guys that run Crack Me If You Can at DEF CON, they used to work for me. And they've given me a lot of great tips over the years. Length is key. Mm-hmm. So I use long passwords, but they're phrases, they're obscure phrases, and then you start mixing up and I've had arguments with people like, oh, but guessing words, you just dictionaries, you can do it. And I'm like, if you mix it up enough, and one of the biggest things you can do to defeat a cracking program is just put a space in your password.
Yeah, because it increases the level of entropy, and it increases the key space massively just to have a space.
Yep.
Yeah, actually, you got to be careful with that. I've had organizational hashes where they've had nice sentences with spaces in them, and we've cracked them pretty handily. So it's not always.
I'm not saying put the space in the expected places.
There you go.
Yeah, no, that's a great point.
Now you clarify.
Clarify that, and don't I was reading the document for a client, and they were showing examples of strong passwords, and they were using phrases, but they were capitalizing the first letter of each word. I'm like, no. Capitalize the second, third, or fourth, or fifth, or randomly capitalize different characters. That also is going to add entropy and complexity.
And anytime you see one of those passwords in a presentation or something like that, always add it to your dictionary. Because.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just because.
Family movie night and correct battery horse staple are always in my word list.
Yeah, but I think when it comes to...
The one thing I'll say about a password vault is if in an enterprise everybody is forced to use it, and they're using the password generation mechanisms within it. The old adage, you don't have to crack all the passwords, you just need one. That goes down a lot. Hopefully, Joff, Larry, tell me I'm wrong.
I'm just not going there.
Yeah.
Well, I also think the benefit of,
because there's a bypass.
Good. And we were talking to Keeper, who's a sponsor on the network, very much similar to the other competitors, LastPass, OnePassword that we've mentioned already. I think from an enterprise perspective, you shouldn't be sharing credentials, right? You should be creating separate accounts for people. But there's also times where in an enterprise setting, you have to share maybe not a password, but a secret of some kind. I'll give you an example. I have to go generate an SSL certificate or key pair. I then have to share that maybe with a developer in your DevOps world. I got to share it with a developer that's got to put that in a production system. Wait, how do I... What's the... Maybe a one-off, like you figure out how to do that, but like on a regular basis, operationally, you need to share secrets, API keys, certificates, and certificate keys within the organization. How do you do that? I think a password manager in an enterprise setting is a great way to secure those communications. Otherwise they end up in places where people like Joff and Larry and Tyler go find them. So.
Yeah, like sticky notes in socks and Knox and stuff.
Slack messages or
your password's only as good as your endpoint security, because the keylogger will capture whatever length of password you have.
Right.
Now, having some spaces at the end of your password, depending on how sophisticated your keylogger is, whether it captures those spaces properly, that's helps
kind of
too.
fun.
Yeah, that's a good point too.
My favorite one lately.
Nice thing about spaces at the end of the password, if you
crack it, you may miss that there's a space at the end of the cracked value and not.
Right. Good point, Lee.
So, silly question: if you're copying a password out of a password vault, does the keylogger see it?
Depends on the keylogger, especially if it's copy pasta.
For clipboard,
If it's monitoring the clipboard,
keyboards.
Yep.
Yeah. Clipboard monitoring.
A lot of post-exploitation tools include that clipboard monitoring.
Yep.
Capability.
Tyler, what was that one that you and Adam worked on? It wasn't NISHO. It was something else. I can't remember what it was.
That was an internal tool.
No, it's public.
Is it?
Yep.
Yeah. The one that we jumped into the ICS environment through WSUS clipboard.
Maybe.
Clipboard C2 was one of them, but.
Give me 1 second here. I'll find it. Invoke clipboard.
I think that's private.
Not anymore. Not anymore. Negative. That is not private. It has not been because you guys talked about it at a conference.
Oh, that's right. You're right. Yep. Yeah. We just used it a different way. That's right.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Phew.
Joff, you teach a whole class on C2 communications. My story number 25 talks about a new variant of the Prism backdoor that targets Linux systems. What I found kind of interesting about this is they flew under the radar. And I'm not quite sure how they flew under the radar, because when I looked at it, it was basically like in 3.5 years, no one noticed what the C2 servers were, and it's HTTP for communications, and it's using a very specific user agent, which I think we would be able to detect. But in this case, AT&T's Alien Vault research team said this one flew under the radar for 3.5 years. No one took down the C2 infrastructure. And on VirusTotal, its samples were like so low that like no one would really discover it using the threat intelligence kind of feeds.
Well, so, VirusTotal, first of all, right? I mean, a lot of the stuff that I teach is all about how to create, sort of zero-day samples with any of your software that you're going to put on the client side, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, VirusTotal is one of those things that, good luck with any of my malware, because every time I put something out there, it's got a
different.
brand new hash,
You're
right?
And therefore, you're flying in that sense, you're flying under the radar organically. Yeah.
Yeah, organically. Now, but on the traffic side, though, and using a plain text protocol with a well-known user agent, probably with a well-known payload that's easy to analyze, people just weren't looking for it, right?
But you and I both know active countermeasures and looking for those C2 communications. You would see that, right?
Yeah. So active countermeasures is very, very focused on the beaconing aspect, right? And still is, which is important. Because you do need to poll when you've got a C2 channel. There is a regular heartbeat, regular beacon that has to occur at some level. It doesn't have to necessarily be an even frequency, but it is something that has to continually communicate with the C2 infrastructure out there. Now, it is possible to highly distribute the C2 infrastructure and to kind of multiplex that around, right? And if I haven't read too close in the article, but if Prism is an example of this, it might be much more difficult to catch if you're spreading out those transactions and you're not beaconing to one or a small set of reliable destinations.
It's interesting though, Joff. Like thinking about it, so many sites and browsers have enforced SSL and TLS that being HTTP is almost an anomaly. Like you've got much less sheer HTTP traffic potentially when you're comparing that to the browsing habits.
That's a really good point, because just almost everything is hanging out in TLS these days, and maybe people are not looking so much, right? And it's a valid point. I can, the other thing that strikes me, this is kind of interesting. Recently, on an engagement, I've been busted by DNS technology as well that actually looks at and quite literally, and I can say this one out loud, actually black-holed a CloudFront domain by analyzing. I don't know how actually they did it, but they decided that was malicious after my C2 channel was running for some 48 hours or so.
Is that's Amazon's CDN technology, CloudFront, correct?
Yeah, I mean that was pretty bold, right? To step in front of CloudFront and go, nope, that CloudFront domain is bad.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because a CloudFront domain, you would think you were like some random string .cloudfront, .aws.com or whatever. You would think that's a valid domain. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost always profiling, right? The heuristics and the traffic for the profile, they're picking up those.
That's it. That comes back to a statistical clustering kind of mechanism that's looking at the regular heartbeats and probably looked at the fact that my C2 client side was doing a DNS lookup to resolve the CloudFront domain, probably for every single connection. And in this case, it was Cobalt Strike underneath it. So it's probably a vulnerability in the way the stageless Cobalt Strike stuff works. So that's actually, I need to go back into the lab a little bit on that one and look at it to see what's going on there. And it could be the TTL on the CloudFront domain was low enough that it kept going to the upstream DNS provider, and they saw the frequency of that, and they said, okay, that's it. We're going to black hole that.
Now you got to do Route 53 to get some actual domains in there with some reputation to be interacting with your CloudFront.
Right. It just opened up a
works
whole
well.
Pandora's box of stuff that I want to do.
It's amazing how I don't know if I had one of the stories in there that came across. I don't know if I wrote it up, but Amazon lets you both, in my previous experience with Route 53, actually register a domain through Route 53 and also get a certificate through Amazon. Like you could do everything through an AWS service to stand up a new site with a domain name with a certificate.
You can. The problem with that is like you start to end up with something like Team Cymru data where you're doing an operation, they see all of your traffic, they pick up one beacon, and they make a call to AWS, and now they have, with Team Cymru data, you can see every communication back to any entry point for command and control or access to the Cobalt Strike server, and you can set your whole infrastructure and operation down in one fell swoop in one called AWS,
right?
Because you're all on one platform.
If it's all new as well, I'm sure they're taking that into account. If you get the Team Cymru data, you're like, hey, someone just spun up a brand new domain with CloudFront, with Route 53, with a brand new certificate. If that stuff is all new, I'm sure that is detectable in some way as well.
So something that's sorry.
No,
something that's really interesting there is.
I was just gonna let them keep fighting over who's gonna talk.
You want to dance? Want to dance?
All right, Joff, and then Tyler.
So something that's really interesting that I just noticed was on that actual topic is the TTL on the default CloudFront domain creation is 60 seconds. So that is going to force an upstream provider to look it up on a periodic basis. So next time I do some C2 setup, I'm probably going to
adjust
remediate that issue and set a stupidly long TTL on the DNS infrastructure.
Less chatter, basically. Yeah.
So they're seeing DNS lookups as potentially beaconing traffic, which is kind of interesting. And I had another thing to say, but I totally lost it because I'm middle-aged or something.
Tyler, did you have something to add on that, or?
No, I mean a lot of what we're seeing from like C2 or like advanced actors or even stuff that we're working on, right? Like the big push and the big move is to get your C2 into SaaS applications, right? Mm-hmm. So things like Slack. If you're seeing regular Slack messages with inside of that, and your C2 is posting Slack messages as a C2 channel, it's a lot less obvious for them to be able to completely block or shut down Slack. That's a very difficult thing to do at a channel or team level. And so we've seen a shift in malware and some more advanced toolkits start to make that shift to SaaS applications, O365, EWS, Slack,
Discord,
Zapier apps, Discord. Those things are much more difficult because the chatter and the channels, well, we have profiles in C2. Some of those things can be signatured and looked at and evaluated.
You're literally
But
hiding in the
Slack
noise.
and SaaS applications, your API calls.
No, that's
right?
that's a good
those
point.
Things are continual.
And actually, that really does speak to the AWS domains as well. I mean, everything that we're doing here is trying to hide amongst the noise, right? Instead of making your and it has the additional benefit of hiding your back end as much as you can, right? And it's always good to hide your back end.
Always good to hide.
My experience.
Always good. CYA.
Yeah, CYA, exactly. The other thing I was going to say real quick, and it just came back to me, was in terms of the CDNs, I haven't seen AWS stop us from using them, but I have seen Microsoft stop us.
Interesting.
Azure has certainly cut us off when we at times when we've tried to route C2 traffic through them. So.
I did want to talk about a man who was robbed of 16 Bitcoin.
This is interesting.
Pretty sizable chunk of change. Sues the thieves' parents. Mark Rash, very famous former prosecutor with the U.S. Justice Department, said the plaintiff is claiming.
Mark.
Yeah, have we had Mark on the show? No, we need to have him back. Plaintiff is claiming the parents are liable because gave them notice of a crime committed by their kids and they failed to respond. A lot of these crimes are being committed by juveniles, and we don't have a good juvenile justice system that's well designed to both civilly and criminally go after kids, so they're going after the parents.
So how are they providing attribution to this, though? That's what I want to know.
With some of the Bitcoin addresses provided attribution.
So Tyler, from my understanding, reading the story was that copy-paste stealing Trojan on the victim's computer that was used by some individuals to transfer Bitcoin from their wallet to another one at Bitfinex. And Bitfinex account was tied to a specific individual with a specific name under the age of 18.
I mean, that's how I do it too. I transfer to someone else's Bitcoin wallet before I transfer it out.
Yep. But
what are you saying? The parents are in on it?
I'm just saying, like,
somebody else, like, it's a compromised bit.
I like how Tyler always kind of.
No, what I'm saying, I think
glean like tinfoil hat stuff.
What I think Tyler is saying is that Bitfinex being compromised and transferring it to some random wallet, but based on what I gather, that it is still sitting in some 18-year-old or under 18-year-old kid's wallet. And if that were me and it showed up in my wallet, I wouldn't. Yeah.
Even more proof that 18-year-old has no fucking idea that that's his Bitcoin.
The article also said there was some posts, and there was the 18 or sub 18-year-old was asking how do they cash out of the Bitcoin. This is a Krebs on security article, of course, very detailed. Yeah.
Yep. Also, the email that I saw that was in that article seemed kind of all the things that we teach our users not to click on, like I am from Nigeria, king from Nigeria, want you to click on this thing. If your son has done a bad thing, pornography, send Bitcoin to this address. Like, it felt scammy to me. No wonder why the parents didn't respond.
See, I mean, I don't know. Like, this is where I think I would personally draw the line. Like, Bitcoin is there. Bitcoin wallet transfers happen. You mess up on your Bitcoin, it's like cash. You're fucked. You drop $100,000 on the ground and someone picks it up. Like, yeah, you can try and sue them and prove that that's yours, but that's kind of BS. Like, you dropped the cash and you transferred it. It's done.
Yep, it's gone.
I don't like this liability with crypto that but opens up a whole lot more.
But so Tyler, what do you feel about someone that has Bitcoin and they got SIM swapped?
Yeah, you should have probably had some fucking SIM protections in. Like, you got SIM swapped. Like, don't tie SMS to your damn Bitcoin. But the problem is that
that was the only thing that was available, and the SIM swap wasn't their fault. It was because of the provider that allowed the SIM swap to happen.
I think, putting my lawyer hat on, which I'm not a lawyer, I just have a hat, that
nor did you say it at Holiday Inn Express last night?
The SIM swapping is the fraud, right? Yep. But proving the damages from that fraud is what you have to prove of, Tyler, your example, the $100,000 I dropped on the ground. So prosecuting someone for SIM swapping, you have to prove fraud, but then you have to prove those damages, and that's the real, more difficult thing. Obviously, SIM swapping is
you also have to prove mens rea.
That
you also have to prove mens rea and habeas corpus.
This is where we have to get an attorney on the line. Yep.
Right.
Oh, man.
I mean, but an attorney is always going to go with the liability standpoint of this, like thinking outside of the attorney and like law and all the BS that the law and legalities bring.
Fiduciary harm. You have to prove fiduciary harm. Fiduciary harm.
He just wanted to use that word.
I did. Where I don't want lawyers to get their sticky, grubby little hands in for liability and class action and private suing. Like, crypto's kind of managed to stay out of that space. You fuck up in crypto, you're messed up. Like, you gotta know your shit. Do your shit right. Like, if you mess up and someone steals it and you maybe fly to a third world country and get your damn crypto wallet back, no one's the wiser. You didn't break any laws. There's no people suing you.
It's not real currency, right? It's not real currency, right, Tyler?
I'm seeing a T-shirt, right? I'm seeing a T-shirt here for Tyler that says on the front cryptocurrency, and on the back says "Don't fuck it up."
Yeah, and don't lose your thumb drive with your wallet on it.
That too.
Yeah, but I mean, then you get into like insurance too. But you get into insurance, like what you due diligence, and where I get concerned when we've got financial harm that maybe isn't a criminal punishment by certain standards. You can't get the federal authorities involved because there's not enough of that monetary loss. But you get into the Dark Knight Diaries episode where he chronicled someone who was SIM swapped and they were sending pizzas to their house to try and extort the short handles on social media platforms. And that's where I think, like, there's bad things happening and we need laws to protect innocent people, but it's still flying under the radar, and criminals know this, so they're like focusing on this narrow area where they can make money and fly under the radar of law enforcement and in the justice system here in the U.S. Right. That's where I take issue. I want to see that problem addressed, because I feel bad for the victims. And you really listen to Dark Knight Diaries episode, man, you feel bad for the victims. They're sending pizza to their house at 11 o'clock at night and stuff. They're sending pizza to their parents' house and stuff like that. Like that. That episode still rubs me the wrong way. I get angry when I talk about it.
And I think there's a place where you can bring the law into this, but the ramifications of doing so, like, you start to think about smart contracts, right? And how many things hinge on smart contracts, not even just talking about cryptocurrency, but smart contracts where contracts are code and certain actions happen, often with cryptocurrency tied to those. That code is set in stone. And if you start to bring in liability and lawyers and insurance inside of some of these smart contracts, the whole cryptocurrency smart contract and the appeal of what this code as a contract brings starts to fall apart. You're back to where we are now with liability, legalities, and people getting happy with tort cases and civil cases.
We hit all the buzzwords there.
Yeah, we did.
The legal. None of us are attorneys, but we hit all the buzzwords. I don't know if we used them correctly, but we used all the buzzwords. I'm proud of us.
Yeah. I think we leveraged our core competencies.
Yes. So what you're saying, Tyler, is we need homomorphic encryption. Never mind.
To seek synergy.
To seek synergies.
Yeah.
With that single pane of glass.
Hey, Paul.
Yes.
You forgot about we need blockchain. Come on, dude.
We need blockchain. We need a blockchain. That's going to save us all.
And smart contracts.
And smart contracts.
Any NFTs? Do we need any?
Of course, we forgot the NFTs.
Oh yeah, and Sec 554 if you want to learn about smart contracts and seriously.
Any other stories? that we want to cover this week?
So there was one out there that I was kind of surprised about, and it wasn't. I added as my number 2 just kind of as a throwaway, but there was a story about Cloudflare detecting a huge DDoS attack.
Oh yeah, we covered this on ESW.
The thing that got me, I say Cloudflare, and I think CDN. Well, they actually have another business. They have this autonomous edge DDoS protection. Mm-hmm. And they're like all over the damn world. They're like in a couple hundred data centers with many terabytes of traffic. I'm like, holy crap.
Well, that's part of the appeal of CDNs, right? And some of the protections that CDNs as a service with add-ons, with DDoS protection add-ons, that's some of the things that they provide as part of like why you would set that up for, you know, something that's semi-public or very, very large.
My question is why? Like, Cloudflare has stated that it was a 17.2 million requests per second DDoS attack. To test
a botnet. In fact, I seen this go down probably about 6 months back with when Twitter, Instagram, and one other major site went down. I was on one of the forums, and they were testing a botnet, and they were trying to demonstrate, like, hey, here's the sites. They're going to go down. Watch. Here is 1.5 trillion
requests per
terabytes in requests, UDP requests to these servers, and sure enough, they went down right there. It was a demonstration.
Yeah. Now, who wants to rent me?
Sale of that botnet. Yeah, exactly. That's how it went down.
This was a Mirai botnet, according to the reports as well.
There's another thing that's going on too, and that is that that ransomware DDoS is now a thing. So instead of exfilling your data and getting you to pay to get it back, they'll just DDoS the crap out of you until you capitulate and pay.
Yeah, that's old school too. We've seen that in history as well. Like ransomware is just like, we got encryption, so we can encrypt your data. But really, ransomware is about cutting off access to your data, whether it's encrypted or whether it's a DDoS attack or whatever it is. Right? They want you to pay. It's extortion.
Yeah, so it's
what it is.
It's an interesting trend, and I was like, in a webinar last week, and I was learning about it. I'm like, holy mackerel, this is crazy.
Yeah, and but that's what gets me about and concerns me about the focus on ransomware is it tends to segue into this data security thing. I'm like, really, what they're after is disrupting operations and making you pay to get your operations back. And some of it focuses on the data. But like, what if they were just to take out your operations? I mean, sure, you need your data maybe for your operations, okay, but you also need the connectivity and your and all this other stuff for operations. They're just going to take that away. Like, we haven't seen the full. We see ransomware like really the more tentacles coming out, right? Like we're holding your data hostage, and
I've seen encrypting it. I've seen enough hentai to know where this is going.
Yes. Lots of tentacles.
This is where it gets interesting, right? We've already seen them take over VMware vCenter, right? Like starting to encrypt your data center, which is operations infrastructure, multiple machines. Like forget the data. The data lives inside of all those machines. That's your capability to operate. But I think we talked about this 2 weeks ago when we said SaaS applications are single sign-on. Someone takes that over, changes your two-factor authentication, takes over.
That's where I'm going as an
whatever
attack
application,
right? You've got Azure SSO. Like, I'm just going to take that over. And like, how much operationally am I going to impact your organization from an like, that's big.
Tyler just reminded me of something. One of my favorite things to do on pen tests, if I get that far, is just put a screenshot of their virtual infrastructure in like, hey, look, I'm logged in as administrator to your virtual infrastructure. That gets attention.
Yep.
Right.
Big time. Yeah. Big time.
Big time.
Yeah. I think it's more security is a more holistic approach than just protecting your data. I don't want to discount that as being like not important. Right? Obviously, it's important. You have to protect your data, but you have to protect your entire operations as an organization. That also means, Joff, to your point, protecting access to those systems and services that run your operation, and that's your VDI infrastructure, that's your cloud infrastructure, that's your SaaS infrastructure, that's your data. It's all of those.
That's your CRM. Think about Cisco. Yep. Like if someone took over Cisco's Salesforce and got the admin account, changed the password and the two-factor authentication, and locked everybody out, what is daily sales worth to someone that is doing billions of dollars?
Tyler thinking with his ultimate evil hat on.
We love Tyler's evil hat.
It's a really big evil hat.
Yeah, of course. That's why Tyler's here. I mean, come on, it makes it actually. I always love when you bring that perspective.
I mean, that's not the only reason he's here. I mean, he looks good too.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's that.
Well, and if you ever get to meet him in person, he
feel younger.
And if you ever get to meet him in person, he smells kind of nice too.
He does smell nice.
He smells nice.
And that hair.
And the hair.
Oh my God, the hair.
Oh,
Larry,
rock hard. The hair.
It is. It doesn't move, dude.
No, it doesn't.
What hair? Oh, Tyler's hair.
Let's talk about more theoretical things that maybe aren't quite as scary, like eavesdropping by LED. I think that's a good story. Because I love talking about this. I mean, part of it is C2 infrastructure, sort of, but also like data exfiltration that is using these. We've covered so many stories over the years. But what's amazing is, like, we're never done covering these stories about how innovative and abusing of technology that could seem innocuous. I mean, we've seen alternating fan speeds, reading pixels on a screen, the radio waves, sound waves.
How much energy your television consumes that can be monitored by your power meter so you can tell what show you're watching.
And LEDs, like anything, if you study physics, that could be studied in a, for lack of a better term, like a scientific manner, we've kind of covered as attackers could use that to exfiltrate data, and this is just the latest iteration of that.
And this was one of those. They basically got in a Zoom call with a set of external speakers, and the LED, the power light on the speaker, was observed from 35 meters away via telescope. And they could observe the pulsing of the LED, because as the speaker is moving, it is consuming electricity, which is drawing from the LED a little bit, which is changing the LED very subtly. And they were able to recover waveforms from the pulsing of the LED in the set of speakers.
Oh, can we talk about like resistance and
I feel smart with my C2 and like ways to get out of shit until like you read these stories and you're like, these people have some serious they're on spectrum or something. I don't know.
And even better, it wasn't just the speakers. They ended up using a set of audio device plugged into a USB hub. And they pulled the power draw, because the USB hub, every time the speaker does its thing, pulls more power from the USB hub, therefore changes the LED on the USB hub.
You would think that those, hardware-wise, those would be not related to each other. Like that?
Nope. I mean,
it's amazing that they are related to each other. Right?
It is amazing that they are related. They are related. Now, obviously, in this particular case, the speaker was better audio fidelity than it once removed from the USB hub.
Wait, I'm going to put a picture of speakers that I think every single one of us had in the Slack channel. What were those
Cambridge
called?
Cambridge Soundworks?
What are those? Do you guys see that?
Oh.
Or Harman Kardon.
What were those called?
Oh God! Yeah, everybody had those.
Everyone had those.
Dude, I still have a pair of those in my basement that I used to listen to audiobooks while I'm at my soldering station.
Yeah, what was, I don't remember the brand name, and it's hard to describe in audio what they looked like, but if you saw a picture of these speakers, if you had a computer in the late 90s, early 2000s, you probably had one of those speakers, and one of the commenters was like, yeah, and one was always not working. I totally...
Dude, I have a pair of those sitting at my soldering station right now. Literally.
I used to have those on my computer.
Was it Cambridge Audio or Harman Kardon or something like that? They're beige, speakers.
Dude, you're getting a Dell. That's all I can say. They came with every Dell system.
Had them.
Yep.
They were so ugly.
Yep.
Oh God.
But you could totally tell, like, when you were bumping music through these speakers, and they had a subwoofer option to them too, but the power LED would definitely respond as
so my favorite was the Cambridge Soundworks stuff.
It was Harman Kardon. Adrian Sanabria is weighing in. They're Harman Kardon speakers. They're gray. If you saw the picture, you would. Alltech Lansing.
Yep.
Alltech Lansing. They're also branded as. Yep.
Again, my favorite was the Cambridge Soundworks. I actually just threw out electronic recycled my last set of Cambridge Soundworks 7.1 system, and it was a sad day. But
Do you have a little ceremony?
No way. You can get a pair on Amazon. No, they're not available.
eBay though.
You could eBay those for sure.
Hell, if you want my pair, like, I'll send them to you.
I have to say, being an audiophile, they weren't bad speakers, but what their downfall was the connections between them were just very cheaply made. All of the that connected the left speaker to the right speaker, and even the power source, like all of it was not well put together. It wasn't engineered.
It was like an S video cable too on the one side, so you could never repair that.
It was just the connectors were very cheaply made.
My current favorite at my desk at home, I think they're a pair of Logitechs, and really what it came down to was, like, I have multiple systems in my office. At least 2 of them I need to have audio from, and I want them on a set of speakers so it sounds decent. But then I have 4 speakers at my desk because I have one set for this system and one for I don't have enough desk space for all this stuff. So I found one set of speakers, and I think it's Logitech, and if anybody's interested, just ask me and I'll send you a link to Amazon, that has 2 inputs. Just speakers. Like, I don't need a mixer. I don't need I plug one into one system and I plug one into the other system.
Yeah.
And they sound relatively decent. They were $40 for the set of speakers, and
you know what I did? I recycled all my home stereo theater gear, and I just get stuff connected to a receiver, like with a DAC, simple DAC, and I just connect it to receivers with speakers. That's how I repurposed all all speakers.
I don't even have a
and receivers, because I had receivers and all different.
Kids changed our living room. Like, we put in the electronics recycling my Sony subwoofer that we had for years. Why? Because the kids stuffed their damn Legos in it.
Yes, that happened to me too in one of my sets as well. I've repurposed all that stuff for my computers though, and I get a DAC and connected. I tell you what, even a cheap receiver with even a cheap pair of speakers sounds better than those Harman and Kardon speakers. Right? Yeah,
probably.
We've got a decent TV, and the audio on the TV sounds okay. Admittedly, now that the kids are a little bit older, I'd love to have like 7.1 surround to be able to go sit down and watch an amazing movie. Maybe.
One
later.
of the things I'm working on,
later.
Not security related, in a closing note, is if you haven't checked out Rune Labs, Rune makes a really cool software system where you get apps on your devices. You can build Linux systems that act as servers and bridges to stream all of your audio. You can connect it to physical things. It's really cool. It's Linux. It's nerdy. I mean, they want you to buy they basically have a Linux device that they've pre-installed the Linux software on, and it plays all your music, and it's expensive. But if you know Linux, which most of us all of us on the show and most of us listening, we don't work with Linux, you can build your own devices, and they give you the software for free, and it's really cool. And it's not super popular. I gotta also imagine that it's super vulnerable, because when they talk about what distros are supported, they're like, it works on Ubuntu like 15.10, and some people report like 18.04 it works great on. And I'm like, really? That's kind of interesting. But it's really cool stuff.
It's amazing how your priorities change for this type of stuff. When you're thinking about selling your house and moving cross country, like,
you want to get rid of stuff.
What can you actually take with you, and what can you leave behind for the new owners, and what will help your resale value?
Right.
So, like, that's where we are currently.
It's a thing.
Yeah,
it's a thing.
Like, interestingly enough, we were going to be doing a get-together event at Guardians, and we moved it to all virtual, and I canceled my plane tickets. Unfortunately, it wasn't booked refundable, but I have a credit with an airline. And we figured out what we're going to do with that credit, because I'm not going to get reimbursed for it because it's credit with the airline. But we're going to use that later next year to go take a trip and go buy a house. So
there you go.
Awesome.
Yep. Nice. It's, every day we move closer and closer
to the goal.
And closer into the goal. Yep.
$29, Lee. Harman and Kardon computer multimedia speakers.
Yep. And $15 shipping for the eBay version. There is a set available for $10, but there's $30 shipping.
Oof, that's too much.
Ooh,
that's too much. You could find those at a yard sale by you. I guarantee you.
Sure.
Guarantee you. Like, I found some amazing stuff at yard sales recently. Yep. one of those hand drills, the crank ones.
Yeah.
And then I didn't even see it, but they posted back on Facebook like, "Hey, the yard sale's over. If anybody wants this stuff for free, you can come get it." I'm like, they had a bag with 2 bowling balls in it. How did I not buy that?
My wife hates yard sales. Just go off on a tangent for a quick second. Hates yard sales.
Yep.
But when I see yard sales and when with my kids, I'm like, guys, here's what you're looking for. I'm like, tools.
Yep.
Because
antique tools.
And any kind of tools, because you can get them cheap. And even if you use them a few times, you get saw for $1. Perfect. Anything cast iron, because you can restore anything that's made out of cast iron.
Yep.
And vinyl records.
Oh yeah, that's good advice.
Right, when I go to a yard sale, that's what I'm looking for.
I stay away from the vinyl just because there's so much quantity of stuff that is just crap. But you're not wrong with cast iron. You're not wrong with a good portion of tools.
Vinyl you could be a little more picky about too.
Yeah.
And original vinyl is, and usually people don't put that in a yard sale because they recognize the value of it. But like original pressed vinyl, and from the 70s and 80s especially. I've got some stuff I've inherited that's just amazing.
Yeah. For me, you add to that list silverware, utensils.
That doesn't go wrong.
Because
go bad, rather.
Much of that is potentially silver that people don't realize is silver. And some of the tools just in general are of amazing...
Any kind, even power tools too.
I go for the more antique because they're made out of a metal that is an amazing thing for turning into knives.
Yes, that too. Yep.
And some other ones too. Vintage electronics that people like. Oh, I don't want this old radio, and it's a 1930s
old turntables,
big plate radio.
I was explaining the intro the other day. I'm like, dude, like audio stuff doesn't go bad. Like it really gets better with age. I mean,
you got to do some rehab to it. Old stuff.
But usually speakers, audio gear, headphones, pretty good buys. Recone them, restore them.
Yep. Does anybody recone anymore? I remember that was a thing.
Yeah, still do.
Oh, I'm sure.
I've got a set of headphones that I need to rehab because they're of the same era of the radio that my dad FM radio receiver that my dad assembled from a kit that I listened to the original Star Wars radio dramas on. And it was a built-in to the house that we got to keep when we sold the house. I have the radio. I have a vintage set of headphones that you would have been plugging it in, and I got them at a yard sale for $1.
Oh, that's awesome. So I think that will round out the show for this evening. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching this edition of Paul's Security Weekly. Larry, take us out.
Over and yard sales.
Mm-hmm.